Morning, everybody. So let's begin the session number two of our course, which is on finance or non-finance staff of NGOs. We had done the first session last week, uh, last Saturday, and we had seen how we are all concerned with various aspects related to finance. What does the finance function do? So we had seen that they enable, they shape, they narrate the value creation that we have for not-for-profits. Today's session is very, very important because we are doing something that we do every day. We are trying to understand whatever we do every day is what we will study and see in, simple terms. So today's session is on grant management and the layout of the session. So grant is something that is not defined anywhere in the law. We always talk of grant, donation, but generally speaking, the word grant is not defined in any law. However, we will try to understand what is a grant and what are the types of grants or what are the types of funds that are there. So there are five sections in this session. One is to understand what is grant. Okay, please be very attentive in this session because this is something that as programmers you do every day. However, the understanding of what these terms are, what these mean, and what is the entire spectrum is sometimes not known. And therefore, we are not able to take decisions or do actions as we should be doing because there is a lot of things that is related to convention or practices, and it's not specifically mentioned in law. So I have tried to bring all that together in these five sections. First is what's a grant. We tend to understand, we know everything what a grant is. Since it's not defined in any law as such, therefore, what is it that it means? What is a grant management system? And what is the prerequisite for a good grant management system? That's the first part. So we will then know what is a grant, and then we will move on to the concept of fund based accounting, or sometimes called fund accounting, and the various fund types that are there. Okay, so I'll try to bring together all the things that we normally deal with, but we really do not know what each of them needs to be actually classified or categorized like. The third one is, as from the funds we move on to the concepts of costs and cost types, because we now need to do the budget, understanding the funds. The fourth is, of course, the budget itself, the types of budgets, the monitoring of the budget, okay, and the monetary and the budgetary control. And the fifth thing is the various aspects related to a grant contract. Okay, so when you do a grant agreement or a grant contract, what are the various operational and legal terms and conditions that are there, which we need to understand. Now, at times we do not fully read the grant contract, but anyway, I will try to explain to you these five sections one by one, and that will probably complete our understanding of grant management. These are very, very important sessions. Now, the first is, how do we define a grant? Okay, so we are doing five sections in this. One is about grant and the grant life cycle. The second is, what are the various types of funds which we call as grants. The third is, how do we cost for these grants? Okay, how do we estimate costs? And then the fourth one is, when we estimate costs, how do we put them into the budget? How do we monitor them? And the fifth, of course, is once we get the budget, we get the grant, how do we interpret the various terms and conditions in the grant contract? That's the sequence, that's the order in which we are going to study. Now, what's a grant? I've already told you that the word grant has not been defined specifically in law. Okay. So we will have to understand from practices, from conventions, what it means. And here I have mentioned some of the points related to a grant. Okay. Grant is given from one entity to another. So they are called the grantors and the grantees. Okay. So these are the two entities. One is the giver, the second is the receiver. Now, the purpose for a grant. So when can we call it a grant and not a kind of sale purchase transaction? We'll see in the second slide. But the primary purpose for a grant is a public benefit or a charitable purpose. Something which is going to benefit the public at large, or it is for charitable purpose. Please remember, the word charitable uh, has been defined in different laws, but what I'm trying to say is that the charitable purpose means that you are trying to help some public beneficiaries which are not kind of identified, but generally they are the community. Okay, so this money goes from one entity to another, and the entity is generally a NPO. The receiving entity is generally an NPO or a charitable entity, as it is called in our language. Again, what is a charitable entity? Basically, a charitable entity is an entity which has been set up as a trust or a society or as a Section 8 company for doing charitable work. Okay. Now, the charitable work is what is very much defining what a grant is. And of course, the donor and the donee are people whose relationship means that both of them are not trying to get any benefit. It is not an automatic entitlement. Please don't think that if you are running an NPO, getting grant is your automatic entitlement. No, it's not. You have to win a grant contract by virtue of your institutional strength as well as your program proposal. Second thing, it's an obligation to be discharged. So a lot of us tend to think that if we have got a grant, we have got that as an income. That's something that is our income of an organization. Please remember that grant is a liability. It is not an income. It's an obligation to be discharged for the benefit of the public at large and to be reported back to the donor. So a lot of chief functionaries also think that grants are our income. No, once the grant has been discharged, once the obligation has been discharged, once the liability has been fulfilled, only then that amount of liability that has been discharged will become your income. Okay. Uh, Therefore, we call grant what we call grants, we call them as trust money. This money has been given to us in trust, in confidence, in some kind of a way that, well, this trust money will be used for the beneficiaries. So there are three actors in a grant. One is, of course, the grantor who is giving you the grant. The second is the grantee, people like us. Okay. So we are, we are in a certain sense the trustees with fiduciary responsibility to the grantor. Now, what is the meaning of trustee? So we are holding the money as funds, the grant funds as a trustee. We as a trustee on behalf of the grantor. And fiduciary responsibility means that our primary responsibility is towards ensuring that the grant money or the trust money that we have got is used for the purpose for which it has been given, that is for the charitable purpose. And the fiduciary responsibility is both to the grantor, the person who has given us the money, as well as for the beneficiary for whom the money has been given in trust. And of course, the third actor is the beneficiary. We call them community, we call them public, whatever it is. But when we do charitable work, please remember we do public charitable work. Okay, we don't do private charitable work. Now, what does that mean? That means that the grant money will not be used for anybody in private, no private person, but for public at large, where we have not identified those people, but they are generally a homogeneous group of people whom we need to benefit because they need that, benefit by way of charitable work. Okay. So this is something that you need to understand. Now, nowhere in any book you will find this kind of a definition. So I'm only trying to say what are the features of a grant. Sometimes we do not realize that grant is trust money. Sometimes we think that grant is our entitlement. Sometimes we think that grant is our income. No, it is not, as we are seeing. Now, the grantor and the grantee, okay, are not deriving any benefit. In fact, the so-called benefit is going to the beneficiary, all right? But the entire purpose of the grant is to provide some benefit to the beneficiary. Again, the beneficiaries are not identified. The benefit is as per the grant contract, but the grantor and the grantee are not getting any benefit. So the grantor does not get any direct benefit, and the grantee is not expected to get a benefit or to pay the money back. In a grant contract, do we pay back the money? No, because the money is actually intended for the beneficiary. Now, the payback is only there. Payback means refund is only there if you have not used the grant for the intended purpose. Then the grant contract may have a clause which says that you will refund the money if you have not used it. That's another purpose. But generally, the grantee is expected to spend the grant, ex make expenditure on the of the grant money as per the budget for the beneficiaries. And therefore, there is no direct benefit to any of these two entities. The direct benefit is going to the beneficiary. Okay, that is why the concept of trust. Okay, now the grants come in different forms. So they can come as grants in aid if they are given by government. So different sources are there. So you will have government giving money, you will have institutions giving money, you will have individuals giving money, you will have CSR corporates giving money, you will have foreigners under the FCRA giving money. They are all different sources of grant funding, and they give monies for charitable purpose. Okay. Now, they are called differently. For instance, if the money is coming from the government, it's called grants in aid. If it is coming from individuals, it is called retail. If it's coming from the corporates, it's called CSR money. If it's coming from institutions, it's called foundations. So these people are there, and they are also bound by different laws. Okay, just as we are bound by different laws, corporate CSR is bound by the CSR law. We will see a bit of CSR law in one of the sessions. So what I'm saying is that grants are not all same. They come from different sources and they are designated differently. So we have to understand where they have come from and what are the frameworks related to those grants. Okay. Now, grants can be either directly, so which means that a donor says, well, it comes to you and says, I want to give a grant, or there can be a competitive process where people have to compete. Now, please remember, grants are also on competitive basis. So there is a request for proposal, and whichever proposal is the best is through the competitive process wins the grant. It's not an automatic entitlement. It may be an entitlement based on your being able to prove to the donor that you are the best in terms of both cost and in terms of organization, in terms of programming, in terms of your program proposal, that you will be able to deliver it. So this is what is called a grant. Now, I think a lot of your myths and misconceptions will go away once you understand these, 7 points that I have mentioned. You will not get them in any book, but these 7 points clearly explain what our thought process should be when we actually deal with grants. Okay. Now, this slide should be able to give you a complete view of how we have to look at grants when they come and from which sources, for what purpose, for the beneficiaries. Now we move on to the difference between an exchange transaction versus a grant. We need to understand that. Exchange transaction essentially means buying and selling. Okay. So how is grant different from buying and selling is what I'm trying to explain. And therefore, grant is not taxable. That's the reason. But we have to understand what is an exchange transaction, what's a grant contract, because when we set up our grant or when we take a grant, we must see that we are fulfilling all the conditions of a grant and we are not getting into the trap of an exchange transaction. Now, the exchange transaction, as per the GST Act, is supply of goods and services. So here, a grant does not have supply of goods and services. There may be goods and services, but there is no kind of identified persons to whom the goods and services is being provided. Second consideration, although there is payment, but there is no return of payment. Whenever there is a buying or selling, somebody will get something and somebody will pay something. Okay, that is not the case in grant. So there has to be consideration if it's a transaction which is in the nature of buying or selling and in the course of furtherance of business. Are we into business? No, we are not. Therefore, these 3 points should be understood in terms of the distinction between a sale and purchase transaction and a grant contract. So grant is not exchange transaction. Why? Because ABC, no specified beneficiaries, nothing in return, okay, either from the beneficiaries or from the grantor, okay. So benefit should not be there to you. Now, what I'm saying is benefit in terms of Covering your indirect cost is not a benefit because you have to cover your indirect cost, but you're not getting anything in return either from the grantor or from the beneficiaries for providing those services. And this is not for furtherance of business. Okay, so we are into charitable purpose. There is nothing like business. Okay, therefore grants should have the characteristics of, no identified beneficiaries, nothing in return, and not for any business purpose. Now, this has to be understood very clearly to be able to distinguish between a sale purchase transaction and a grant contract, and also to understand that the contract that we sign as grant contract does not have any of the characteristics of sale and purchase. When we do CSR contracts, sometimes we make these service contracts. So service contracts definitely are under GST and you will fall into the trap of GST. Okay. So the understanding the above for grant contracts is crucial. Okay. Because otherwise the transaction will have implications of GST and TDS. Okay. Although it is a grant contract, but if it has been stated in the form of a service contract, okay, then there will be a problem of GST and TDS. This can also affect your charitable status under the income tax. So this distinction has to be understood between exchange transaction and grant. Now we saw what grants are. We have seen what exchange transaction and grant differentiation is there. And the word grant, again, I'm saying is not defined. So we have to understand based on these particular features of what should be considered as a grant. Okay, what practices will consider this as grant? And now moving on to grant management. Now, grant management or the grant management system. Now, a grant management system will have two key players. We all know that somebody who will make a grant, they are called grant makers, they are called grantors, they are called donors. So they may be called any which ways. And we as grant seekers, we are seeking grants, we are grantees or we are donees. We can also be called as trustees. Please remember, we are trustees. कभी आपको पैसा कोई देता है और कहता है इसको आप ट्रस्ट में रखिए और इस बंदे के लिए ही आप यूटिलाइज करेंगे, नॉट फॉर एनी अदर पर्पस. That's the meaning of the trusteeship that I'm talking about. So we are a grantee, we are a donee, we are a grant seeker. Now, what is grant management system? The grant management system has three, four parts. One is identifying an opportunity for grant. So what will be the kind of composition of a grant management system? From the grant, we are coming to grant management system. So one, identifying opportunities for getting grant. One. Second is applying for a grant. Okay. Then after the opportunity is there, we are applying for that grant. We are preparing a program narrative and a budget. Then third thing is we are securing the grant. So the donor has selected us for the grant, that is securing grant or grant contract, adhering to the grant conditions in terms of implementation of the grant and evaluating the outcomes. So there are these five parts to this grant management system. And the various parts or the processes in the grant management system constitute what is called as the grant management life cycle. Okay, so please remember, every grant has a life cycle. Just as we have a life cycle, every grant has a life cycle within the overall concept of grant management system. So when we talk of grant management system, it's the entire gamut of the grant management life cycle. But then the grant management life cycle breaks down grant management system into several processes or steps. Here you can see what the grant management life cycle is. Sometimes what happens is that we only realize that we are party to only one part of this grant management life cycle. However, we need to understand the entire process so that the grant can be executed, properly, and the donor can give us money again. So that starts the grant management life cycle starts from planning. I will show this. I'm showing this as a image or a pictorial, but we will see what is included in this planning phase. But we must understand the full dynamics of a grant. So this is the grant management life cycle. Okay, and these are called separate words. So the planning is identifying, getting ready for being able to apply for a grant. Okay, then when you're planning means in-house planning has to be done. All your records, all your registrations, all your everything is in order, or your due diligence papers are in order. Are you completely, in terms of system for development or systems being there. Those are what is the planning stage. The second is the opportunity. So you will this opportunities is what is considered as the pre-award stage in the life cycle, and it has several parts. Okay, and we will see what the pre-award stage has. But we are saying that the pre-award means that once we have planned our in-house business properly, we are now looking at opportunity for applying for a grant based on our planning. So what is our objective? It's in our charter. What we are good at doing is the one where we should look for an opportunity. Now, the opportunity, if once it comes, will then give you make you make an application. It can be directly to the donor, or it can be through a competitive process. This is what is called as the pre-award stage. But there are more components in the pre-award stage. But broadly on the pictorial, that's what I'm trying to explain. Next slide, we will see more in detail. The second is award. So once the application has been accepted, is what is called as the award stage. So the grant award has been made to you. That is what is after the pre-award, the award. And once you have got the grant award, then comes the post-award stage. So there are three stages broadly in the life cycle of a grant: pre-award, award, and post-award. Post-award is execution, and the next one is close-out. Close-out का मतलब होता है that you have closed the grant successfully. That is what is called as closeout. Now, once your post-award closeout is successful and you have delivered, again you come to the reapplication stage. So if you have done well, your planning continues to get stronger and stronger, and you go back to the opportunity where you can go back to the same donor if there is an opportunity with the donor. And since you have done your job properly, because you have understood the grant management life cycle completely and done work as per the grant management life cycle. Now, each of us will have different roles to play in the grant management life cycle. But unless we understand the full picture of the grant management life cycle, we will not be able to contribute our best to the execution of the grant. Why? Because we have to look at the next. Here we have the grant management life cycle. सबसे नीचे मैंने लिखा है reapplication, which means that if you have done the grant management life cycle steps properly, and the organization has you know demarcated roles and responsibilities properly for the grant. For a grant means single grant, and every grant that is like that. And therefore we have to give due importance to how the grant will be, right from the time that you look for an opportunity to the completion or close out, as we call it. How do we do it so well that we go in for reapplication or reallotment of grant by the same donor? It's only then that your organization will become bigger. Now, what are the components in the pre-award stage? Is the planning, as we had seen. Okay, uh, planning means we have to see where is the need identification I've mentioned. What is the need identification? Means that for the kind of work that we do, or for which we are created by our charter, the object, whether it's education, health, environment, whatever, you have to look at need identification for that strength that we have. Okay, then you will have to do a strength, work, weakness, opportunity, and threats analysis. You have to do your due diligence properly. That's part of the planning stage, meaning that you have all the registrations, you have all the requirements, processes set up in your own organization. Then you look for funding opportunities. So the needs assessment, needs identification, and funding opportunity has to match. Only then you will be in a competitive environment, be able to. We had seen a lot of competition in the previous session. So we have to look at funding opportunities based on need identification, where we can with great strength fulfill that need. Okay, that is what it is. Grant application and review. So the grant application is made, and who does the review? The donor or the donor's consultant will do the review. What is the review? The review is to see whether you are eligible. How will you prove your eligibility? Because your planning is proper, your registrations are proper, your systems are proper, and you are qualified, because of the fact that you have already done so much of work in that area that you are qualified for fulfilling the need for which there is a funding opportunity. समझ गए? ये है हमारा प्री अवार्ड स्टेज. नाउ जनरली वी डोंट इवन बॉदर अबाउट प्री अवार्ड स्टेज में हमको क्या ड्यू डिलिजेंस के लिए डोनर आएगा आएगा उस दिन देखेंगे. ओके, सो दैट्स नॉट हाउ प्लानिंग इज. And then you'll say, sir, this is like taking so much of my time and effort. The answer is no. There is no little cost. There is some time and effort, some systematic way of working, thinking, and no extra cost. There is no extra cost that I have talked about. It's only because we don't want to do that, we create an artificial barrier of cost or huge amount of time. No, because this has to be done once. Okay, and then you have to only update it. The award stage is the award negotiation. So you have made an application, but the donor is not bound to accept your application. So that is the negotiation. बैठ के कौन सा program के activities को at the activity level, okay, at the input level, you know, the efficiency concept that we had talked about. So then there is a lot of negotiation around both budget and activities in your program proposal. Then you have the award decision, which means after negotiation, there is a decision. Yes, we now find. So it's not that your program proposal and budget is final. After negotiation, the award decision becomes final. And the award decision is converted into paper, which is called the award notification or the grant contract or the award contract. Again, there are no specific words that have been, you know, mandated. So you will have these keep changing based on organizations, the the kind of sources. गवर्नमेंट में कुछ बोलते हैं, फाउंडेशंस कुछ बोलते हैं, एफसीआरए कुछ बोलेगा, सीएसआर कुछ बोलेगा. But in essence, whatever I am saying is what it is. So the grant notification or contract is the final stage at which the award closes. Now comes the post award. That is, now I have to implement the grant contract. Okay, so you'll make a fund request, whether it's fund in advance or a reimbursement. In CSR, it's on reimbursement basis. Then the implementation has to happen based on the program and the law. So then we have implementation of the project. Then we have reporting. So you have implemented, you have reporting. Now here also, lot of the work that you did in planning in terms of reporting, because if you have planned your financial systems properly, if you have planned your MIS systems properly, the reporting on program and finance will be proper. So grant contracts will not get repeated unless all things that need to be provided reporting के अंदर timely reporting, accurate reporting, complete reporting, all these have meaning. Accurate means that there is no mistake. Complete means that whatever is desired in terms of the report. Sometimes we just tend to give some information and don't give the other information. So timely, accurate, and complete reporting is what I'm actually saying. Post award amendment. So you had a, you know, in the second stage, the award contract, but in the third stage, you might need to amend the contract because that was based on an estimation. But when we are implementing, we might want to change this. And this also needs to be understood by everybody that a award may need to be changed during the tenure of the contract or the award, and not at the time of closeout. And that is the mistake that organizations do. Why? Because their program reporting, their financial reporting, their variance reports, their monitoring of the grant is not being done on a timely basis or on periodic basis. So you need to have a robust grant monitoring system that we will see afterwards. Post award amendment should be done on time. So any key changes that you want to make, you need to get those approvals. Do you want to change the budget because you have budget is an estimation again? So did you want to have the budget amendment made, or what we call as reallocation, realignment, budget revision, all meaning the same? Okay, or do you at the end of the project, when you are coming closer to the end of the project, you find the budget has not been spent, will you say we will not want a change in the budget amount, but we want a no cost extension? And that's what is called as NCE. So the program project period gets extended without an increase in the budget amount. So all those post award amendments should be done in a timely fashion is what we are saying. Okay, then what is the performance, what is the impact? Okay, so the reporting and finally the impact report, or your outcome report or impact report, depending upon whether it's a short duration, long duration, what you have agreed in your log frame. is something that you will have to then give. The last one is closeout. Sometimes we are not serious about closeout. Closeout is a very important part of the grant contract. Closeout means that all the financial, all the programmatic, and all other terms and conditions relating to the grant have been fulfilled. And formally, we have intimated to the grantor, and the grantor has acknowledged that that the contract or the grant contract has been successfully closed. That's what is called closeout. So even if the donor doesn't ask you for that, it will be good that at the end of the program, whatever, and there is a clause in the grant contract on closeout. So after fulfilling those conditions in the closeout clause of the grant contract, we will then just send out a communication saying that we have successfully closed the grant. Please let us know anything more needs to be done, so that the grant contract is officially closed. Otherwise, 3 years later, 2 years later, again the grantor can come back and say, well, this was not provided. So we have to rule that out, and also not have pressure after 2 years to respond to something by saying that there is a formal grant close out. If you have done these processes, these steps in the grant management life cycle properly, then and then only you will have an opportunity for reapplication. Otherwise, the donor will go to some other grantee, okay, and then try its luck with that grantee. However, I can tell you those organizations that have grown bigger from small organizations have grown bigger because the donors have continuously supported them. And therefore, we have to look at a donor not in terms of a 1 year grant, but in terms of 5 years, 10 years. And then it's only your organization will get built up. So the reapplication, as I am saying, is I cannot overemphasize that, but it is the most important part in terms of, the end result of the grant management life cycle is probably a reapplication and regranting. If you get that, probably all the steps that have been mentioned is something that you have done successfully. Now comes to the principles of grant management. So some of the principles that I have put together are accountability, transparency, and trust. Okay, so this is the biggest thing that we have to, and therefore, if you have transparency, what is transparency? Transparency is like having a glass. Okay, now you can see both sides of the picture through the glass. The glass doesn't obstruct. So your systems, your information, your data, your reports, your work should be transparent. That is, it should be see-through. Anybody can see and say, well, this is what they are reporting, is what they have done. Accountability means accountability for the outcome. Unless you have accountability. So accountability means ownership for the outcome. Now, if the donor knows, well, this grantee or this organization is accountable for the donor funds, that trust will automatically come. And these are some very important parts in terms of, for a donor, in terms of selection of a NGO. Very, very important. Now, these words may not mean anything. They have to be part of your culture. Okay, accountability, transparency, and trust. So transparency would mean all information that is available and can be seen through. So you can go and see the same information on the ground. You can see the same information in your records, in your accounting records, whatever you are presenting in your financial or programmatic reports. That is what is called transparency. So your actions are not covered up by any kind of untruth or something which cannot be understood. If that is the case, then the donors will become uncomfortable. The second is efficiency and effectiveness. I have already told you that that is the secondary objective of an organization. So grant funds, both in terms of efficiency, I'll not repeat that, and effectiveness, what the difference between the two is. One is process driven, the second is outcome driven. Now, both in terms of processes as well as in terms of outcomes, the grant fund should be made use of in that fashion. Only then you will go in for a re-granting. The third and the fourth is basically compliances. Laws of the land, all the regulatory provisions that are applicable to you should be complied with. Only then the grant will be successfully implemented. Because the grant implementation is not only related to what the grant contract says. The grant contract also says that this grant will be implemented within the statutory and regulatory provisions. So both in terms of the grant contract terms and conditions, as well as in terms of the regulatory framework for implementing the grant, both have to be complied. So the grant contract will say you will comply with the FCRA law. Does it say anything more than that? It only says that if you do not comply with the FCRA law, this grant can be terminated. But what does the grant contract say? The grant contract says you will have to comply with FCRA. Otherwise, the grant contract can be terminated. But the FCRA law tells you how to comply with that particular funds under that particular grant. That's the difference between compliance with laws and adherence to conditions of the grant. Next is internal controls, and this is something that we will keep studying. Internal controls. And I think we have already mentioned that in the last session where we had said when we do planning for an organization, the finance department lays down internal controls, internal control frameworks, policies, and procedures. So we will see a lot of these internal controls, internal controls. Basically, internal control doesn't mean anything except that it is a framework. ये एक दायरा है beyond which you should not go, and within that framework or daira, how the work has to be done is what is laid down through those internal controls. Communication and timely reporting. Now, it's not just delivering execution of the contract. Reporting is equally important. We had seen in the previous slide in terms of the post-award stage, reporting, और मैंने क्या कहा था? Complete, accurate, and timely. All three, not that the donor comes back to you and says, you were supposed to provide this report on 15th, today is the next month's 15th. You have not provided the report, which means there is something wrong in your systems. Communication means that you have to communicate about the grant with the donor in an open and transparent manner. So it should not be that you start communicating with the donor at the closeout stage. That will mean that you have not read the conditions of the contract, you have not implemented. Now there is some emergency, therefore you are coming back. These are some of the principles of grant management. And I now move on from the concept of grant to what is called as fund accounting. ये जानना बहुत जरूरी है. Okay. Now, not for profits organization. आपको किसी ने नहीं बोला होगा फंड बेस्ड अकाउंटिंग क्या होती है. आपके अकाउंट्स वालों को भी नहीं पता होगा. बट हम जब फंड बेस्ड अकाउंटिंग के कॉन्सेप्ट को इन इजी फैशन समझेंगे, तब हम ये समझेंगे कि ग्रांट फंड, हर ग्रांट फंड अलग अलग क्यों है. वाई इज एवरी ग्रांट फंड डिफरेंट? बिकॉज as a NGO, as a not for profit, we are supposed to follow the concept of fund based accounting. Okay. Fund based accounting in very easy form means, फंड बेस्ड अकाउंटिंग मतलब हमको अकाउंटिंग किस बेसिस पे करना है? हर ग्रांट फंड को अलग मानते हुए करना है. दैट एवरी ग्रांट फंड इज सेपरेट and unique should be the basis of our accounting. This is what is called as grant fund based accounting. When you manage grants, okay, when you manage grant, does the law, does the income tax talk about fund-based accounting? Again, unfortunately, it doesn't talk about fund-based accounting. The ICAI, that is the Institute of Chartered Accountant, helps us tell, tell, tell us how we should be looking at grant funds. So every grant that you get is a discrete grant, means it's a unique grant. And all the grant funds that you get under the grant are also unique. So, as I have mentioned, fund accounting, okay, means recording and tracking project funds. Okay, project resources means grant funds, nothing else. So you are recording in your account books, in your bank, and you are tracking means you are monitoring the funds where the use is restricted by the specific conditions. So you will know, now come to know, that every grant has restrictions or limitations on use of the grant fund, which is specified in the grant contract as specific condition. इस grant को आप इस काम के लिए use करेंगे. So that is a fund meant only for that condition, not for general purpose use. or not for use as you like, as the chief functionary says, well, ye yahan se use kar lo. No, because the fund has been received with a condition in the grant contract that that fund is limited or restricted to that specific purpose. And the specific purpose requires us to treat that grant fund as a separate fund. That is what is called fund-based accountability. Now, the fund-based accounting means accountability, productivity. You know, in case of for-profit entities, we are talking of NGOs, but on the other side, when we talk of for-profit entities, they don't talk of accountability and fund-based accounting. They don't, because they are making purchases and they are making sales of the products for profit. Okay, so they look at the entire fund as a total fund. All funds coming from sale is one fund. All expenditure is one fund, because at the end, the whatever sales and whatever expenditure minus, you get profitability. We don't do profitability. We do accountability. Why? Because we are a trustee of the funds. We have to ensure productivity of the funds, meaning efficiency and effectiveness. All right. So that is the big difference between the way accounting is done by for-profits and the accounting is done by not-for-profits. And that is called fund-based accounting. Now, again, I want to recap the features of fund-based accounting. Now, आपको ये समझ आना चाहिए कि जब आपको grant contract के against में मिलता है, तो that is a discrete, unique fund, and the fund is carrying a certain restriction or limitation. It's a separate fund. It's a bucket or compartment which is separate. So, if you were to look at uh, your organization implementing grants, then you can look at as several compartments in which the funds of each of the grantor is running. Say there are 10 compartments or 12 compartments as grant contracts, and each grant contract has grant funds which are all separate. They are not getting mixed anywhere. They are, because they are running in compartment. Okay, the next one is restriction on use. So please remember, grants are called restricted funds. You cannot use the grant. That is why grant is an obligation. Grant has restriction, और वो हम भूल जाते हैं. Sometimes we think that this is something that is our income. So unless we change our thought process in terms of understanding that grant is basically not our income unless it has been discharged, only then it will be reflected as income in our income and expenditure statement. And we will see that in the next session when we do financial statements. A separate budget, because the fund is separate, therefore the budget for utilizing that fund is separate. वो fund तो आ गया, 100 rupees आ गए, लेकिन अब 100 rupees को उस purpose के लिए, the restricted purpose के लिए कैसे इस्तेमाल करना है, based on the budget that has been approved. Okay, so there is a, you will see that for each project there is a budget. It's not that we are getting grant funds and we can use the grant funds as and when, as and when, and as and how we want to know. Each of these project funds, project grants have budget. The income that you get is credited to that fund, and the expenditure is debited from the fund. Means from that compartment in which the fund is running, you will take out money, you will get the money for that particular grant, and you will take out the money only for that particular grant. That is based on the principle of fund based. It is not a lump sum based, it is a fund based accounting that has to be done for grant. Okay, very important to understand this. Transparent, it ensures transparency, because there is no mixing up. Whatever is there is clearly see through. You have software for for recording that. You have your tally software where you can set up cost centers, and in each cost center you will have the opportunity to record the income and expenditure. It ensures good internal controls, because there is no way in which you are using the grant funds for any other purpose. You are using it based on the internal control framework. Monitoring and reporting becomes easier, okay, because you can monitor how much money has been spent. You can monitor how much progress has been made against the money that has been spent, and reporting is easier because it is by a fund, not mixed up with anything. Normally, you will have the bank account also as separate. So you can also see what is happening in the grant as far as the grant fund is concerned in the bank. So there is no mixing both in the books while recording transactions, income and expenditure, and also in your bank. This is the concept of fund-based accounting. Now, if you understand the concept of grant and you understand the base concept of fund-based accounting, you will have very great clarity in terms of how to implement grants. Now we come to the type of funds. Now, please remember, as I had said, the word grant, it's not defined in Indian laws. Okay. अगर आप income tax में if you go, you will find the words used are voluntary contribution, corpus, or donation, and it's called VC generally. Well, when we are reporting, it's called foreign contribution when we talk of CSR. It's called CSR fund when we talk of CSR law. But is the word grant used anywhere? No, it's not used. It's not used. It's the way we consider it. Please remember the differentiation. There is differentiation between grant and donation. Grant and donation के बीच में भी फर्क है. Okay, and we will see that. Now, after understanding that, well, we have been using this grant word, but how do we look at the different types of so-called funds or grants? Because there is no definition. There is no definition in any law, and all laws use the word differently. So we are relying on the ICAI's, technical guide. It's a very good guide, okay? And the 1922, 2022 version is something that you can look at. Now, the ICAI has classified the grant funds for NPOs two ways. One is what is called as unrestricted fund. Sometimes foreign institutions that come, they call it UF. And the second one is RF. ये कहीं नहीं मिलेगा आपको. But all funds that you get by way of grants and donation, again, difference between grant and donation word. But whether you get anything by way of grant and donation, चाहे आपको foreign contribution मिलता है, चाहे आपको CSR allocation मिलता है, चाहे आपको voluntary contribution मिलता है, चाहे आपको corpus मिलता है. All these are classified broadly into two categories, which is unrestricted fund and restricted fund. Unrestricted, by the word unrestricted, means there is no restriction on the use or period of the fund. तो अगर उस फंड में जो आपको मिला है, वो ग्रांट जो आपको मिली है, उसमें पर्पस डिफाइंड नहीं है. अभी हमने पिछले स्लाइड में क्या देखा था? फंड बेस्ड अकाउंटिंग में आपको पर्पस डिफाइंड है. Here the purpose is not defined and therefore it is unrestricted, both in terms of purpose as well as in terms of time. Now, what are the funds that you can consider as unrestricted? The first and foremost is corpus. Now, corpus is something that is a lump sum money, and many of you must be knowing what this corpus is, CORPUS, which pays a lump sum money where the donor has given this money stating that it is a corpus. So the donor has to say that this is corpus, but they have not defined what is the end use to be done with the income from the corpus. You will not touch the corpus, that lump sum amount you will not touch, but you will use the income for certain specific for whatever purposes that the organization thinks it wants to use. So there is no restriction on use of the income from the corpus. Okay, but generally the corpus is something which is non-reducible, as I have mentioned. Now, corpus is something that has been mentioned in the income tax law, while the word grant is not mentioned because the word voluntary contribution is mentioned. Now, non-refundable, generally the corpus is non-refundable. It is given one time and is a lump sum money. It is non-reducible, means you should not reduce it, you should not consume it. And there is a reinvestment obligation. इसका मतलब क्या होता है? That the income that you will get on the corpus, part of that income, maybe say 10% of that income or 15% of income should be added back to corpus. So if you had 100 rupees of corpus and you generated 10 rupees on that corpus by way of interest, then 15% of that 10 rupees or 1.5 rupees should be added back to corpus. So it will become 101.5 in the next year and subsequent years. Why? Because the idea is that the corpus itself should also grow to offset the inflation. Okay, and you should be able to get that much amount of interest so that you can meet your cost. Here the corpus income does not have any restriction. समझ लीजिए, इनकम के ऊपर रेस्ट्रिक्शन नहीं है। रेस्ट्रिक्शन सिर्फ ये है कि आप उसको कंज्यूम नहीं करेंगे या कंज्यूम करेंगे विथ अप्रोप्रिएट approvals from the donor. During COVID, there were situations where the corpus itself had to be consumed. Now, corpus is when there is a specific donor direction that it should be corpus. Now, if it is not mentioned, then it cannot be treated as corpus. Not income, but is capital. So please remember, corpus is a capital item or a capital amount. It is not shown as income. Only the income that you are generating from that capital is shown as income in your income and expenditure statement. So you understand that there is a balance sheet, you understand that there is an income and expenditure statement. अगर आपने कभी अपनी financial statements देखे हों, 9 out of 10 लोग ना देखे ही नहीं है। ओके, उनको यही नहीं मालूम होगा। बाहर बाजार के अंदर अगर आप जाते हो और 5 आदमियों में से कोई इंटेलिजेंट आदमी, कोई सरकारी आदमी, कोई डोनर का बंदा आके आपसे पूछता है आपकी बैलेंस शीट की साइज क्या है, तो आप बोलोगे ये तो मुझे नहीं मालूम, फाइनेंस वाला देखता है। इट शोज सो पुअरली अबाउट द ऑर्गेनाइजेशन। So the organization should also encourage, as I had mentioned in my live session, the Oncar organization should encourage non-finance people to understand the broad. I'm not saying you have to sit down and do tally, but at least understand the broad picture of your financial health, which the audited financials are telling, which we will see in the next session. So continuing with corpus, it is not income. It has to be invested in certain methods of investment. It cannot be applied, so you cannot use it for giving it to another organization. Those are all conditions that are there with corpus. I am not trying to get you into very great details, but what I'm trying to say is that there, whenever you get corpus, that corpus has to be invested in a certain fashion, otherwise it will not be considered as corpus. अगर हम नॉट फॉर प्रॉफिट एंटिटी हैं, तो क्या हम नॉट फॉर प्रॉफिट एब्सोल्युटली हैं? नहीं, इट्स नॉट एब्सोल्यूट। वी हैव टू abide by all the conditions that have been laid down for us to be called not for profit, or to make our income not for non taxable. Our income will become non taxable only when we fulfill the conditions laid down in the law. Not that since we are not for profit, now under income tax, everything is non-taxable. Everything is taxable if you do not fulfill. Even corpus, if you use the corpus, then it will not be considered as capital. And if you give it to another organization, it will not be considered as application. So there are several conditions, but you can use it for your own objectives. Okay, as and when you like, you are free. Your board decides how the income has to be used. That is why it is called unrestricted. Second one is donation. Okay. So please remember, between grant and donation, donation is unrestricted grant. There is no obligation, just like in corpus, no obligation on the income. कि भाई इस इनकम को ऐसे स्पेंड करना है, नहीं, आप जैसे ठीक समझते हैं, for the best achievement of the objectives of the organization is how you use it. The second one is, of course, there are no obligations in a donation, and it is treated like a gift. So if you get any money as donation, as money that does not have any conditions attached to it, then that is what is called as donation. However, if there are conditions attached to it, then it is called a grant. Again, nowhere in law this distinction is there, but that's how we have to understand, based on how the characteristic or the feature of that fund is. Coming now to the third category of unrestricted funds, that is what is called as earmarked or designated funds. Now, earmarked or designated funds are free funds. So whenever you have income, whenever you have expenditure, and suppose you get your corpus income and you didn't spend it because you didn't need to spend it, it will become your reserves, or what we call it general fund. ये जो सी नंबर है, सॉरी देयर इज सम chronological disorder. The general fund is the surplus of income over expenditure. So when you make your income statement and your expenditure statement, and if there is a surplus, will it be taxable? No, 15% will not be taxable. and you can take it to the general fund. You can call it your reserves, you can call it your surplus, and you can use it, as I have called it, free reserves. जैसा आप चाहें वैसा यूज कर सकते हैं. That's called general funds. But if the general funds, the management says, nahi, ye general funds ko we should not just keep it as general funds, free funds, because you never know how it can be used. But in the next 2 years, we want to purchase a vehicle, we want to construct a small office, we want to do this, we want to do that. Then these free reserves, based on the management decision in the governing body, can be converted from free reserves to designated fund. But these are free reserves. We have designated this fund as a designated or earmark fund because we think we should be able to every year take out some money from the general fund and give it to the designated fund, so that in the next 3 years we have that much money and it is not spent. So the designated fund will be spent only for the purpose for which management, not law. Law does not say designated fund create करना है. Law के लिए तो designated fund और free general fund एक ही है. बट इस जनरल फंड में से हमने कोई कंपोनेंट को डेजिग्नेटेड फंड इसलिए किया है, that is that it cannot be used, number one, and second, over a period of time we will keep adding to that designated fund, and suppose we want a vehicle for 20 lakh rupees, then by the end of 4 years, every year if we transfer 2 to 4 4 5 5 lakh rupees, then by the end of the third year we will have a designated fund for vehicle, designated fund for building, out of the free reserves only. Okay. Otherwise, these general reserves can be used by management for any purposes that they want to do for the achievement of their objective. Now, these are the four types of unrestricted funds. One, corpus. Second, donation. Third, designated earmarked funds by management, not by law. And the fourth, of course, is the surplus of income over expenditure, which is called general funds. समझ गए? These are the four types of funds. So now you will be able to see that हमें जब corpus मिला या हमारे पास जब कोई donation आया, that is directly going to income. That is our free fund. Or when we have a surplus of income over expenditure, that is also surplus or free reserve. Then you have restricted funds, because there is a restriction both in terms of there are conditions, there are restrictions. So we have talked about two categories of funds, broad categories in which all funds that NGOs get can be, can be shown or classified. So the restricted means restriction, condition, restriction. So the biggest fund that we normally get is the project program grants. Now, project program grants may you have what is the condition of the award? What are the restriction? The restriction can be by purpose. For a period of time, you have a grant contract for a particular period. Within that period, that purpose has to be completed. Okay. There could be other conditions or restrictions. This project-based or restricted funds truly is fund-based accounting. So when we've seen fund-based accounting, program grants have to follow the principle of fund-based accounting truly. Why? Because they are restricted by the terms and conditions of the grant contract. Are the unrestricted funds restricted? No, they are not restricted, because the donor himself itself has said that, well, we are only saying you don't consume the money, but the income you do use whatever way you want. If there are surplus of income over expenditure, can you use it? Is there any donor standing? Nobody is standing. But in the best interest of the organization, the governing body has to take. The second is called endowment. So a lot of us get endowment money. Now, why I have called endowment is like corpus only. Endowment corpus के जैसा ही होता है. It's like corpus. But the difference between endowment and corpus, because endowment is also a lump sum amount that the donor is giving you, but they will call it endowment and not corpus. Why? Because the income from the endowment is also restricted. Whereas in the case of corpus, the income was not restricted. That is why I have shown endowment as restricted fund. So you read the grant contract and say, well, this is in the nature of, a corpus or an endowment. Generally, endowments are given by foreigners, and also endowments these days are given by big foundation. Okay. So they may give endowments and say, well, you use the money, but we will tell you for what purpose. generally, overall. So there is a restriction in overall use, but they will not micromanage just like a project grant. Now, the endowment grants, endowment funds can be permanently restricted. Permanently restricted means there will be a restriction in terms of how they can be used, or they can be temporarily restricted, meaning for this much period of time or for this purpose for which I am giving you, you please use the income from the endowment fund for this purpose and this period of time. Once the purpose is achieved and the time is complete, then they can become unrestricted fund. Therefore, they are temporarily restricted. And once the temporary restriction is lifted, then they become unrestricted. So then the donor can say, well, now you can treat this endowment as a corpus. Then what happens? The income from that corpus or the endowment, the earlier endowment, which now becomes as corpus, can be used by your organization for any purposes as per the objectives. It is not linked to the initial purpose of the endowment. Got it? So this is the distinction between restricted and unrestricted fund. Very important. अब आप कभी भी कोई फंड आता है आपकी संस्था में, तो आप ये देख सकते हैं कि ब्रॉडली वो इन दो कैटेगरीज में होगा, और इन दो कैटेगरीज के भीतर विद इन दीज थ्री कैटेगरी टू कैटेगरीज one of the classification it will fall. Now if you see the balance sheet, I'm just showing it very open ऊपर से, you will find that the I'm showing you the balance sheet, and on the sources of fund or the capital side, the unrestricted fund is also shown, which is corpus, general fund, or designated fund. Then the restricted fund is also shown, and the endowments are also shown. Okay, so then loans and current liabilities, those are also part of your liability. And on the right, on the niche wala side, there are assets. But what I'm trying to only show is right now in the balance sheet, I'm trying to show you the funds. Okay, so the funds, unrestricted funds will be capital, चाहे वो corpus हो, चाहे वो general fund हो, which is the surplus of income over expenditure, या वो designated fund हो जिसको हमने designate किया है for a particular purpose, because otherwise it was a general fund. Restricted funds basically are unutilized grants, okay, and endowment. Please remember, why are they restricted funds? So why is restricted fund shown as liability? Because it has not been spent. It is an obligation. We saw in the first slide, uh, grants are obligations. Grants are liabilities. And if they are unutilized, then they are shown as a liability. That is why when we talk of restricted funds, unrestricted भी यही देख रहे हैं और restricted fund भी यही देख रहे हैं. Unutilized part of the project grant is restricted fund. Endowment is a restricted fund. But whatever grant has been utilized will move to the income and expenditure, both in terms of reporting as income, the money that was utilized, and the expenditure for which it was utilized. वो फिर हमारा income expenditure हो जाता है, because we have fulfilled the trusteeship concept. But as long as the unutilized money is sitting with us, then we have to be a trustee for that unutilized this thing, and it will be shown as a liability on our balance sheet or on financial statement. I think you have understood the difference between the two. Now, what is net assets broadly? ये हमने लाइबिलिटी देखी ऊपर, सोर्सेज ऑफ फंड्स और एप्लीकेशन ऑफ फंड को लाइबिलिटी और असेट बोलते हैं. ठीक है, मैंने असेट लिख रखा है और लाइबिलिटी. लाइबिलिटी मतलब हमें किसी को देना है, असेट मतलब हमारे पास है. द डिफरेंस बिटवीन द एसेट्स एंड लाइबिलिटी is what is called as net asset. Net asset is basically the net worth. Matlab, if we sell out all the assets and we discharge all our liability, what is left over is called net assets. अब not for profit के अंदर net asset की concept नहीं होती. You must not be seeing net asset here. But the net asset will be what? Your corpus money and your general fund. Because after paying out all you selling all the assets, theoretically if we want to close the organization, then all the assets will be liquidated. And what will we discharge? We will discharge our current liabilities, we'll discharge our loans, we will discharge our restricted liabilities, restricted funds. अगर ये सारा assets इन सबको खत्म पे करके और फिर भी बचता है, that is what is our net asset or our net worth. Now the net asset or net worth is not used because the in for profit entities the net worth is then distributed among the shareholders. But we don't have any shareholders here. We all only have capital here, that is the free reserves or corpus. Now if we close that, then the free reserves and corpus has to be shifted to another such charitable organization, but it cannot be distributed to the promoters or founders of the trust. So we must understand the concept of net asset. Net asset matlab the asset minus liability. If there is any asset there, that is called net asset. And the net asset cannot be distributed, but will be available for being transferred if we are stopping our operations to another such charitable organization. And we will still not be taxable. Okay. Net assets are our corpus and your free reserves. Because अगर हमने हमारे assets जितने भी थे उससे हमने liability discharge कर दी, उसके बाद में जो भी बचेगा वो general reserves ही बचेंगे कैश में अगर हैं, और corpus बचेगा जो इसको कि हमने investment किया है. So normally what happens in case of this corpus money, what we will do, we will on the liability side वी विल एक्चुअली बी मेकिंग इन्वेस्टमेंट. यहाँ दिख रहा है आपको एप्लीकेशन ऑफ फंड्स के अंदर फिक्स्ड असेट है, उसके बाद इन्वेस्टमेंट है. सो कॉर्पस को हम इन्वेस्ट करेंगे सपोज इन फिक्स्ड डिपॉजिट्स, देन व्हाट विल वी विल गेट इनकम that will be shown in our income and expenditure. So 100 rupees of corpus is there on the live asset side, 100 rupees of investment in fixed deposit. That is how it is. So जब हमारी asset को हम सारा liquidate करेंगे या partially liquidate करके हमारी जो liabilities को discharge करना है वो discharge कर देंगे, उसके बाद जो हमारे पास बचता है that is what is called as net asset. But that is not very important. What I'm trying to show you is how do those funds look like sitting on our balance sheet. जब हम अपनी बैलेंस शीट देखते हैं तो हमारे रिस्ट्रिक्टेड फंड्स कौन से हैं, अनरिस्ट्रिक्टेड फंड्स कौन से हैं, और कौन से फंड्स जैसे ग्रांट फंड्स आते हैं तो उनको कहाँ देखना पड़ता है. अगर कोई ग्रांट फंड आता है तो वो यूटिलाइज हो जाता है तो वो इनकम एंड एक्सपेंडिचर में चला जाता है, और वो अगर यूटिलाइज नहीं होता तो वो हमारी लाइबिलिटी में खड़ा रहता है, और नेक्स्ट ईयर जब हम यूटिलाइज करेंगे तो वो इनकम एंड एक्सपेंडिचर में चला जाएगा और लाइबिलिटी और असेट से हट जाएगा. वाई? Because we will use the cash which is sitting there against that liability. The liability will also go and the cash will also go. And where will it go? It will go to income as income and the expenditure, which is the expenditure from that income. And that is how the cycle will continue. So new funds will come. उसमें से unutilized portion will become our restricted fund on the liability. उसका next year में again it will become income and expenditure. That's how the income and expenditure look like. Grants and donations. अब डोनेशन के केस में हमने कहा था वो फ्री है, हमारे को फ्री मिला है, तो वो हम सीधा इनकम एक्सपेंडिचर में दिखाएंगे, वो बैलेंस शीट में नहीं दिखाएंगे, बिकॉज देयर इज नो रिस्ट्रिक्शन ऑन दैट अमाउंट. एंड इफ वी सेव दैट अमाउंट, that is if in that amount is more in the income side and expenditure is less, then this donation will go to जनरल रिजर्व, मींस फ्री रिजर्व, जिसको हम जैसा चाहे यूज कर सकते हैं सब्सिक्वेंट ईयर्स में. द ग्रांट दैट वी आर शोइंग हियर is the amount that we have utilized against which in the expenditure side of our I&E statement हम उसको एक्सपेंडिचर में दिखा देंगे. तो जनरली क्या होगा कि इनकम और ग्रांट का एक्सपेंडिचर अगर हमको मैनेजमेंट कॉस्ट नहीं दिया गया है और सिर्फ ग्रांट इनकम साइड में बजट के अंदर इनकम इज ओनली फॉर मीटिंग द एक्सपेंडिचर, बोथ द अमाउंट्स इन इनकम एंड एक्सपेंडिचर विल बी द सेम. If there is management consultancy and that money has not been spent, then again there will be a difference between income and expenditure, and that higher surplus or higher income over expenditure will move to general reserve. That is how it is. But we call this statement as income and expenditure. We don't call it as profit and loss. Why? Because हम surplus को चैरिटेबल वर्क के लिए ही यूज कर रहे हैं, किसी को डिस्ट्रीब्यूट नहीं कर रहे हैं प्रॉफिट. What happens to profit and loss in a for profit? The profit and loss is distributed to the share capital holders or shareholders. We don't have any shareholders here. And even in the Section 8 company where we have shareholders, the money by way of excess income over expenditure is not distributed to the share capital holders. So generally share capital नहीं लाते हैं promoters जब Section 8 company form करते हैं, and the money will be sitting in general reserve to be used for the aims and objectives of that organization. I hope in this simple, very simple fashion, I have been able to explain to you funds क्या होते हैं. Okay, I'm not reading this. I will do before we do cost. Now we're moving from the fund accounting, types of fund to cost. Okay, third section of our session. First section, grant. Second, grant तो समझ आ गई, लेकिन grant funds क्या होते हैं वो समझ अब आए हैं. अब ग्रांट फंड्स जो होते हैं उसके अंदर वी हैव टू आल्सो डिस्टिंग्विश बिटवीन व्हाट इज अ रेसिपिएंट, ग्रांट रेसिपिएंट, व्हाट इज अ सब रेसिपिएंट एंड व्हाट इज अ वेंडर. जैसे हमने एक्सचेंज ट्रांजैक्शन एंड ग्रांट का डिस्टिंक्शन करा था, ये तीनों का डिस्टिंक्शन होना भी जरूरी है फॉर अस टू एक्सप्लेन, टू अंडरस्टैंड. What is a grant recipient? It's also called the prime recipient. This is the organization which will get the grant fund from the donor straight away. So the principal recipient of the grant is the recipient. ये word का मायने समझना जरूर है. So it's called grant recipient, principal recipient, prime recipient, you call it anything, which means you are responsible for the terms and conditions of that grant contract to the donor. डोनर आपकी गर्दन पकड़ेगा if anything goes wrong, because the two principals in this grant contract, the donor and the donee or prime recipient, it's sometimes called as PR also. अब ये words कहीं defined नहीं है law में, but they are convention के हिसाब से they are used. But if you understand them, then you will be better able to understand the discussions that are going on. अदरवाइज आप पतली गरी पकड़ के और बाहर चले जाओगे, बिकॉज यू नो दैट समथिंग विल बी आस्क्ड टू यू एंड you will not be able to respond. This presentation, after you have gone through this, the recording also आप सुनिए और इस presentation को वापस देखिए, तब आपको clarity आएगी concepts की. मैं इससे ज़्यादा सरल तरीके से नहीं पढ़ा सकता, not easier than this, but I am only trying to give you the basic concepts. अगर ये elementary concepts आपको समझ आ गए, you will not get ever defeated in your programming or your granting or your fundraising or talking to donors or to other stakeholders. The second one is what is called as sub-recipient, sometimes called as sub-grantee. Sub-grantee का मतलब ये होता है कि हमने grant तो ले ली, लेकिन हम सारा काम नहीं कर सकते, we cannot do everything in that grant contract. So part of the obligation under that grant, we will give to another organization which is competent to do it, and that will be called the sub-awardee. That sub-awardee's name will be also part of the prime contract. However, and we will do a sub-award contract between the prime recipient and the sub-awardee, जहां पर the roles and responsibilities of the sub-awardee will also be defined. Please remember the responsibility for the sub-awardee is with the prime recipient only. You cannot tell the donor this sub-awardee did not deliver, because the responsibility for the outcome by the sub-awardee is of the prime recipient. So donor, donee and sub-awardee, yeah, grantor, grantee and sub-grantee. This is the three chain sometimes that we follow, and what each of them means is what I'm trying to explain. But when we had talked about exchange transaction, we had said buying and selling. So the third thing is what is called as vendors. Vendors are people with whom we do not give away our, the outcomes to them, our outputs to them. But for those outputs, we need program goods, we need services, we need consultancy contracts, we need professionals. Do we not need? Those are not either grantees or sub-grantees. They are what are called as vendors. Why? Because there is a give and take relationship in that. Now, the give and take relationship does not, cancel the concept, the very concept of grant being without any benefit. Here, of course, to the extent that the vendor contract is there, it is a service contract and falls under the definition of purchase and sales under the GST. So the purchaser will have to pay GST to the supplier because it's a taxable supply, but does not change the color of the grant unless the grant contract itself is a service contract, then it's a different story. So you have to understand that vendor contracts are basically contracts within the grant contracts which have been there for purchase of goods and services for delivering some components of the programming, and they will be there. So furniture and equipment, some consulting contracts, some trainings that have to be done, ये सब किस जगह आएगा? ये सब हम वेंडर कॉन्ट्रैक्ट सेटअप करेंगे, सब अवार्ड कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स नहीं। सब अवार्ड कॉन्ट्रैक्ट में ये है कि ये पर्टिकुलर एक्टिविटी ऑफ द लॉग फ्रेम, ये पर्टिकुलर component of the log frame, whole and soul will be transferred to the subgrantee, and that subgrantee will be responsible for fulfilling the outcome for that particular activity. But we don't do that for vendors. We tell the vendors activity तो हमको करनी है, इस activity को करने के लिए मेरे को assets खरीदने हैं, मेरे को inventory खरीदनी है, मेरे को program goods खरीदने हैं. Those are vendor contracts. So these three things you must understand. Now we come to the third component of our session, which is on cost. अब जब हमने grant funds के बारे में समझ लिया, so I can also say that if we do not complete this uh, session, we will do that next session, because I don't want to overburden you, but I want to also make you understand the concepts very, very clearly. Okay, you might be finding that हमने ग्रांट का कॉन्सेप्ट देखा और फंड्स के कॉन्सेप्ट देख लिए, अब हमको फंड्स लेने के लिए बजट करना पड़ेगा। तो बजट किस चीज का करेंगे? बजट हम करेंगे कॉस्ट का। सो वी नीड टू अंडरस्टैंड द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ कॉस्ट फॉर बजटिंग। नाउ क्या कॉस्ट का बजट, इज द बजट कॉन्सेप्ट, the cost concept applicable to finance people? Certainly not. You must also understand the concept of cost, because you are the owner of the budget. Last session I said बजट कौन ओन करता है, बजट कौन इम्प्लीमेंट करता है? फाइनेंस वाले तो बजट को कस्टोडियन है। दे हैव टू ओनली सी दैट द बजट हैज बीन यूटिलाइज्ड, रिकॉर्डेड, ट्रैक्ड एंड रिपोर्टेड, but they are not the ones who are using the, the program supply budget line. They are not conducting the training. They are not, using the fixed assets that have been purchased. You are there. They don't know which kind of fixed asset to be purchased. If you're putting solar pump somewhere, do they understand anything? No, you are the owner of the budget for the solar pump. So how do you know about costing? What are the types of cost, and how those costs will go to the budget, which is the next section of our session? Understand? That is why I am taking you one step to another step. अब cost का concept क्या होता है? Cost के types क्या होते हैं? ये समझना जरूरी है. Again, very simply, I will tell you. Now, cost generally and expense, the difference. Again, there is no definition. Cost basically is when you acquire an asset, and expense is when you spend something for regular operation. Asset means something which has economic value for more than 1 year. But we always use the concept of cost. Okay, but there is a difference between cost and expense. I don't want you to get confused with that, only to understand that there is a distinction between cost and expense. Expense is HR cost, travel cost, program supplies, kara or khatam ho gaya, okay, for your regular operations. They will not continue, they will not be tangible for more than whatever time period for which they are, there and get consumed. Now, हमें जब कॉस्ट को नॉट फॉर प्रॉफिट्स के लिए यूज करते हैं, तो हमारे को दो डिस्टिंक्शन, कॉस्ट इज इन टू वेज, एंड दिस इज द crucial thing that you have to understand. There is a natural head of expense and there is a functional head of expense. नेचुरल हेड ऑफ एक्सपेंस का मतलब होता है किस चीज पे, फॉर व्हाट वाज द एक्सपेंस डन, फॉर व्हाट वाज द कॉस्ट डन. What means the type of expense? Okay. The fund was used for salary. The fund was used for rent. The fund was used for hotel accommodation. On what was that particular fund used, or that money used, or that cost was what for what? That is the natural head. ये natural head है. कोई चीज का natural identification होता है. That is the natural head. Now in HR, for instance, if so what happens is each of these natural heads are grouped into broader categories. Okay. Now what can be the natural heads की categories? HR cost. तो आप जब देखते हो बजट को तब HR cost देखते हो. Now that HR cost is nothing but the natural head. और उस natural head HR के अंदर सब heads हैं, which is salary, okay, HRA, PF, gratuity, all that is components within the category of HR cost. But what was the money used for? It was used to pay basic pay or salary. It was basic used for paying HRA. It was used for under the group head travel. It was used for, the travel part. If it's natural expense, okay, it was used for conveyance. It was used for airfare. It was used for food, meals. It was used for accommodation. So you can see for each of these broader groupings, by what on what was it spent? Training. So a training, what was spent was on venue. What was spent was on stationery. Is what, that is the natural head. किस चीज पे हमने खर्च किया. बट ऑर्गेनाइजेशन क्या किस चीज के लिए बने होते हैं? नॉट फॉर प्रॉफिट्स, नॉट फॉर स्पेंडिंग ऑन नेचुरल हेड्स. आर वी क्रिएटेड फॉर गिविंग सैलरी? नो, we are created for delivering benefit to the beneficiary. So our expenditure or our expense should be on the basis of functional heads. क्यों खर्च किया गया ये natural head को? Because at the end of the day, uh, we are not there to distribute salary. We are there to deliver programs, to deliver service. That is the function of the not-for-profit or the why of the expenditure. Okay. So the purpose of the expenditure is what is important for us. The purpose of the expenditure. So when we talk, so many organizations will take the budget from the point of view of the what, but the understanding of cost should be based on for what was the cost used, which is the why of the cost. That is what is called the functional classification or the functional head, the functional expense head. Now, in organizations not for profit, there are only broadly two functions for which all expenditure is done. Sometimes when you go to the income tax department and you show your expenditure in your audited financial as salary, then the ITO says, well, this was not your purpose for which you are set up. You cannot give salary. You were supposed to use all the salary, all the travel for two purposes. One is for program cost, for delivering services, program implementation, monitoring, evaluation. All that is the program side. And for supporting the program, you will have some support or general costs, which are accounting, fundraising, and admin. At the end of the day, all your expense or cost is for a function. And what is the function of our NPO? To deliver service. And what is therefore the why of the cost? Program delivery. And but program delivery will also need some support cost, accounting, fundraising, admin. All that will also be needed because program delivery cannot happen without these support costs. So for us, what is important is that all expenses should be also looked at in terms of program and admin. Now, when we talk of FCRA, FCRA is looking at the why of the expenditure. Why? Because they say आपको सारे expenditure को program expenditure और admin expenditure के अंदर bifurcate करना है और आपका admin expenditure cannot be more than 20% of your total receipts. Okay, that is because they are saying you are getting the money not for spending on the natural head, not for spending on salary, but for a program. What is the constitution of a program? Program service delivery. So that is the why of the cost that you have to look at. This is the one big classification or distinction between natural heads of expenditure and functional heads. Bigger organization report both by functional as well as natural head, but all organizations should report by functional heads. Okay. Now, therefore, I've mentioned there, uh, basically our work is service delivery. Our work is program implementation. So all our costs are not for the sake of paying salary or travel, but for the sake of delivering benefits to the community. And therefore, that is the functional distinction of expenditure in the not for profit. ये आपको जानना जरूरी है. So then you will come to an understanding कि 1 रुपया अगर हमें खर्च करना है तो हमें उससे सर्विस डिलीवरी कितनी करनी चाहिए और उस सर्विस डिलीवरी को सपोर्ट करने के लिए कितना कॉस्ट लगना चाहिए. And the higher cost should be on program delivery so that we can give higher outcomes and effectiveness, and lower on the admin cost. Only then we will get a better advantage when it comes to competition for getting the grant. Now, when we are classifying costs, so this is one side of how to look at expenditure. ये ध्यान करिए. अब हम कॉस्ट को जब हम अपने बजट्स में कॉस्टिंग करते हैं तो हम कॉस्ट को कैसे देखते हैं. एक्सपेंडिचर तो हमने देख लिया. ये एक्सपेंडिचर नेचुरल और फंक्शनल आपके लिए टू हैव अ ब्रॉडर अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ हाउ एक्सपेंसेस आर टू बी लुक्ड एट इन अ नॉट फॉर प्रॉफिट. हमने शायद आज तक कभी नहीं देखा होगा. Now, when we have to budget costs for a budget proposal, how do we look at costs? That is what we are now studying. That is what we are now studying. In not-for-profits, all costs are generally classified as direct costs and shared costs. Direct costs and shared costs. What are direct costs? Direct costs are fully attributed to that particular project, 100% attributed to that project. So if you have a foot soldier, a CRP, a community resource person, an ANM or a ASHA worker or a foot soldier, an IPC for awareness, whatever you might have, that particular person is a direct cost. If you have a supervisor for that, which is only supervising those 100 of those IPCs, that is also a direct cost. Because if the project is there, that direct cost is there. If there is no project, that direct cost will not be there. And that cost is 100% attributable to that activity or project. That's why it's called direct cost. Common cost और shared cost. अब देखिए ये समझना कि बहुत important है, because you know when you will understand these concepts, only then you will be able to do a good budget. Now, shared cost means as against a direct cost is directly attributable. Project, then there is direct cost, no project, no direct cost. However, every organization will still have some common costs, some shared costs. Now, those shared costs will have to be shared across the grants, will have to be shared across the grants. So costs related to top management, costs related to accounting, costs related to fundraising, which cannot be charged or related to some MIS, related to some research, monitoring evaluation. All those might not be attributable to just one project, but they have to be met because the organization has to run. So those are benefiting several projects. Direct cost benefiting only one project. Share common cost or shared costs are benefiting the organization and several projects. Therefore, they are called common to all projects, shared by all projects. So part of the cost of such overall shared costs have to be met by the project, because the project cannot meet the entire cost, but it has to take responsibility for a part of the common cost. Otherwise, who will pay the common cost? We don't make profits. We don't make any kind of surpluses. The shared cost have to come from the project only. So suppose 100 rupees is the shared cost and there are 10 projects, then theoretically at least 10 rupees of that 100 rupees should be contributed by all projects or shared by all projects, just as an example, so that the 100 rupees of shared costs which are benefiting the organization, all the projects, can be recovered from all these 10 projects. Understand? Now the shared costs have to be apportioned. The shared costs are also called common cost, and there has to be a common cost policy. How you will recover the common cost, because then only you will be able to budget that, and the donors will give you that cost. It can be based on time, it can be based on area, it can be based on beneficiaries, depending number of employees, number of project locations. That will come in your common cost allocation policy. But the common cost has to be shared or borne partly by the project based on a certain mechanism or formula. आप ये नहीं कह सकते कि साहब मैंने 10 रुपए चार्ज कर दिया आपको, हो सकता है 12 रुपए हो सकता है 13 रुपए हो, but what are those 13 rupees as to be charged to this particular project will have to be measured, calculated, and justified, otherwise it will not be paid. Now, some of understanding and computing the direct and shared cost is crucial for budget formulation. जो मैंने आपको पहले बोला, जब आप बजट फॉर्मुलेट करोगे तो आपको डायरेक्ट कॉस्ट और कॉमन कॉस्ट या शेयर्ड कॉस्ट की अंडरस्टैंडिंग होनी पड़ेगी. And the shared cost will be direct cost you will attribute based on the fact that it is there in the budget for the project, but the common cost will benefit the project only partly, and it will benefit other projects also. In common cost, there is also something called common direct cost, where out of the common cost, some cost can also be shown as direct cost in the in the budget. Suppose you have have the chief functionary, and that person gets 100 rupees. You can say 20% of its time will be dedicated to this project, which means 20% of that person's salary will be a direct cost, will be called as common direct cost. It will be charged as direct cost. Therefore, only 80 rupees will become the common cost, which will have to be shared by all projects, okay, in a certain proportion based on your common cost policy. अगर आप ये बात समझ रहे हैं तो आपको ये समझ आ रहा होगा कि अब बजटिंग करने के टाइम में हमको ये सारी चीजें काम आएंगी, बिकॉज इफ यू हैव कंसेप्चुअल क्लैरिटी in terms of this, which you will never be able to get in such simple language, then you will be able to understand. So what I want to repeat again, all our expenditure is for the why of the expenditure. Because it is for the why that we have been created as an organization. Once we understand why of an organization, मुझे सैलरी के लिए नहीं चाहिए, बिकॉज मेरे को सैलरी अपने कम्युनिटी को बेनिफिट देने के लिए, सर्विस डिलीवर करने के लिए बंदा रखना पड़ेगा जिसको सैलरी देनी पड़ेगी. बट द एंड रिजल्ट इज द service delivery that salary will bring to the community. That is the function of that expenditure, the functional head. But now when we are doing budget formulation, then we will have to see what costs can be put in the budget. So we have the direct cost, which is अगर project है तो cost है, नहीं है तो नहीं है. And वो 100% will be for that project only, not shared. Otherwise it will become common or shared cost. You can have common direct cost also, where some shared cost can be direct cost. And the third one is, of course, the common cost or the shared cost, which you will have to charge from the donor. अगर आपने charge नहीं किया, then you will not be able to charge that, because you do not have any monies available to pay for those costs. You will lose. You will may end up paying money from your own pocket as promoter. Therefore, the concept of common cost has to be there, and the principle of allocation of common cost has to be defined. So apportionment of common cost is has to be through the common cost policy. मैंने ऊपर लिख रखा है और ये बात मैंने आपको कह दिया. तो सीसीपी जो है वो कॉमन कॉस्ट की पॉलिसी है. कैसे ये कॉमन कॉस्ट, विल इट बी बेस्ड ऑन प्रोजेक्ट्स, विल इट बी बेस्ड ऑन टाइम, will it be based on space? Like if rent is a common cost, then how much space that project is taken? will decide how much is the cost as a common cost you will charge as rent. Can you charge the entire office rent? No. To that project, you will charge only that share based on the area that is covered by that project. The number of employees, the number of beneficiaries, the number of projects that you will have to decide in your common cost policy as the basis of allocation. Common cost is not constant because it will change from year to year. So every year you will have to calculate how much is the percentage of common cost. किसी साल में आपका common cost जो अब आपने निकाला, पिछले साल के cost में से क्या common cost है? Suppose 100 rupees is your total cost, उसमें से 8 rupees is your common cost which is not being given directly. So 8% is your common cost which has to be charged to all the projects to cover that common cost. Next year आपने देखा कि आपका 200 रुपीज टोटल कॉस्ट था और आपका कॉमन कॉस्ट उसके अंदर 20 रुपीज था. Then in that case, the common cost percentage that you will charge in the next year's budgets for programs, for projects will be 10%. And you will have to explain that to the donor why this time you are asking for 8, not 8%, but 10%, because your common cost has gone up. And you will have to show them the calculation for that common cost based on the common cost policy. अगर आपको ये समझ आएगी, अदरवाइज आपको 10% कॉमन कॉस्ट चाहिए, हमको 100 रुपए कॉमन कॉस्ट चाहिए, हमको 50 रुपए कॉमन कॉस्ट चाहिए, कोई भी डोनर आपको नहीं देगा अनलेस यू हैव अ पॉलिसी एंड देन यू आर मेकिंग अ कैलकुलेशन इन टर्म्स ऑफ how you are asking for that common cost based on a certain allocation principle which should be part of your common cost policy. अब क्या हुआ, जब हम किसी प्रोजेक्ट के बजट का टोटल कॉस्ट करते हैं बजट के अंदर तो उसमें 3 कंपोनेंट्स आते हैं. पहला है डायरेक्ट कॉस्ट या डायरेक्ट कॉमन डायरेक्ट कॉस्ट, इसमें आ गया. सेकंड इज योर कॉमन कॉमन डायरेक्ट कॉस्ट, मैंने ऊपर लिख लिया. दूसरा वाला, एंड द थर्ड इज योर शेयर्ड कॉस्ट, ओके, विच इज अपोर्शनड टू दिस प्रोजेक्ट. 8% अपोर्शन टू दिस प्रोजेक्ट एट डिफरेंट डिफरेंट प्लेसेस इन द बजट शीट. इसके अलावा अगर इफ द डोनर इज ऑल्सो गिविंग यू सम इंस्टीट्यूशनल कॉस्ट, so this particular total cost जो मैंने लिखा, total cost for a project is only covering your cost, is only covering your cost. So if there are some more liberal donors, many donors might say we will only give you the cost. उसके कारण we will always struggle to have surplus whenever there is a need, but that is okay. Some projects may give us additional, but as long as your total cost of each project is covered, you are not ending up as a loss. Some projects, some donors, in addition to this total cost of direct and common cost sharing, which will mean that you are not making any loss at the end of the day in the project, but you do not have any surplus for any rainy day reasons, for any casualty, any exigency, any contingency. Some of the donors, in addition to this, will also give you something called as management or institutional cost. So they might say, we will on the total budget give you 5%. This is the money that you might want to keep and you may not report expenditure, but 7%, say for instance, in EU projects, you get indirect costs. They are called indirect cost. So the indirect cost can be in their policy will be 7%. So of the total direct, common direct and shared cost, एक अगर 100 rupees आया, तो उसके ऊपर 7% is your indirect cost, management cost, institutional cost. Again, no standardization. कोई भी कुछ भी कह सकता है. लेकिन आपको ये पता होना चाहिए this 7% or 7 rupees on 100 rupees is something that you will use for the objectives or for your organization, where for your organization where there is no money available otherwise. Please remember that the shared cost, the allocation is there, but the shared cost allocation to this project is not asked generally by the donors. Sometimes they may ask. So if in the grant contract it is mentioned that the shared cost has also to be identified, then you may have to keep records accordingly to show the allocation of common cost for that project to those resources. But mostly the shared cost is given as a percentage and will be charged to the common cost. The institutional indirect cost recovery is not, the bifurcation is not asked, because this is something to create a buffer or a kind of a emergency fund, which donors understand should also be given in addition to the total project cost. But many donors will say हम total project cost के अलावा हमारी grant management policy के हिसाब से we cannot give, but at least charge them equal to the total cost of the project so that all the resources that are required for that particular project are covered in the budget. वो भी एक बड़ा challenge है organization के लिए, because systems नहीं है, documentation नहीं है, capturing का mechanism नहीं है, policies नहीं है. If they are not there, then you will not be able to charge them, because you can't justify. आप जैसी मांगोगे वो बोलेगा नहीं, ये तो ऐसे नहीं होगा, वैसे नहीं होगा. You have no answer. This is what I am trying to tell you. अगर आपको ये डिस्टिंक्शन समझ आ गए हो इन सिंपल लैंग्वेज, then the work will start in terms of how do you justify, how do you look at policies, how do you look at numbers to be able to bring those numbers so that you are able to justify the total cost of the project. I will say for any grant project, the total cost of the project has to be recovered. Should gratuity be recovered if it is applicable? Yes, it should be recovered. ओके, नॉट दैट ग्रेचुटी पे नहीं हम करते, इस साल 5 साल नहीं हुए तो इस साल नहीं पे करेंगे तो हम नहीं कवर करेंगे. जिस साल 5 साल होंगे और वो मांगेगा, तो आप क्या डोनर के पास 5 साल बाद जाएंगे क्या? डोनर से प्रोजेक्ट कॉस्ट के में नहीं था, लेकिन ये तो कॉस्ट ऑफ प्रोजेक्ट होना चाहिए था. सो ऑल components of cost which are the natural heads of expenditure meant for the why of the project should be costed in the grant budget, is something that I'm saying. In addition, if the policy of the grantor allows you to get some kind of a indirect cost, which is something which is for your organization, that is an additional bonus. This is the concept of cost. Now, other types of costs, capital and revenue costs, मैं ये बहुत quickly करता हूँ, but then capital cost means basically when you are buying some capital equipment which has a life of more than 1 year. हमने देखा था ना कि costs हमको equipment के लिए भी चाहिए और हमको program supplies के लिए चाहिए. That is what the revenue cost is. Salary is a revenue cost. Buying laptop is a capital cost. Similarly, fixed cost and variable costs. So if you fixed cost and variable cost means that if you have incurred a certain cost and if you increase the number of units used to be generated from that cost, okay, then the fixed cost will remain fixed. It will not change. So if you have a machine, whether you generate 20 units from that or 200 units from that, the fixed cost will remain the same. But the per unit cost, so 100 rupees is the fixed asset cost, and 20 rupees you generate, 20 units you generate, the cost is 5 rupees. If you generate 200 units, the cost becomes 0.5 rupees. So the unit cost will come down, but the fixed cost will remain the same. That's basically the concept of fixed cost, that will remain fixed with the change in volume. Whereas the variable cost will vary with the change in volume or level of activity. Suppose salary. If you increase the number of villages, if your number of villages was 100, and if you increase the number of villages to 1,000, then if you were doing the 100 villages with 10 people, you at least will need 10 times more people, or may not be 10 times, at least 9 times more people. That's what is called as variable cost. So that variable cost means that the cost will vary with the level of activity. उसके बाद historical cost means what has been, at what cost you had purchased in your account books. This is very important because historical costs help you with a certain margin to budget the cost. मुझे एक लैपटॉप खरीदना है, तो मुझे लैपटॉप कैसे खरीदना है, उसकी बजटिंग कैसे करनी है. मैंने 1 साल पहले या 6 महीने पहले अपनी अकाउंट बुक्स के अंदर एक लैपटॉप खरीदा था 55,000 रुपीज का. So then I should just add another 10% to that 5,000 rupees based on that historical cost, and that estimation should be good because historical as cost, what does it do? It provides for a good basis of estimation. That is what is called as historical cost. और आपको अपने बजट नरेटिव या बजट जस्टिफिकेशन रिपोर्ट में भी लिखना पड़ेगा कि हमने हिस्टोरिकल कॉस्ट लिया है which is based on my books. Sunk cost means any cost that cannot be recovered. So if you have taken an office furniture or you have taken a kind of an office that money you cannot recover anymore. Marginal cost means at every next level of activity, what is the cost? Okay. Uh, so when you increase the activity, the cost should normally go down at every next level. Opportunity cost is the cost between two actions. Okay. So if you want to take an office, will you buy an office or will you take the office on rent? That's the opportunity cost assessment, evaluating the buy versus the rent concept, which is better. That's the opportunity cost. In both cases, you will take advantage of that. Is you have to do it. But what is the opportunity cost of taking one decision versus the other is what is called as opportunity cost. Generally, हम इन concepts को समझने के लिए use करते हैं, but we generally don't may not use it, or the finance people will use it. But हमने ये जो concept of नेचुरल हेड, फंक्शनल हेड, हमने ये कॉस्ट ऑफ डायरेक्ट कॉस्ट, कॉमन डायरेक्ट कॉस्ट, शेयर्ड कॉस्ट एंड इनडायरेक्ट कॉस्ट देखा, ये हमारे लिए एप्लीकेबल है. ओके. नाउ द कॉस्ट प्रिंसिपल्स व्हेन यू आर बजटिंग इज अलाउबल कॉस्ट. ये पांच प्रिंसिपल मेरे लिए बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, बिकॉज आई शुड नो दैट दीज फाइव प्रिंसिपल्स शुड बी फॉलोड in order to when we are costing in the budget. बजट में क्या आता है? कॉस्ट आता है. तो हम सब वही पढ़ रहे हैं, क्योंकि अब हमको नेक्स्ट सेक्शन में बजट पे जाना है, और ये कॉस्ट बजट में दिखेंगी, बिकॉज बजट इज नथिंग बट द फ्रेमवर्क फॉर कैप्चरिंग योर कॉस्ट एंड योर रेवेन्यू. Allowable cost means that should be allowed by the donor. They should not be such costs that should be not allowable. So the donors may give you a list and say, well, we will not allow for these costs. So those should not be costed. Allocable cost. Allocable cost means that that cost should be allocable, or that can be allocated to that particular program proposal. Because we do not have any coordination in finance and program sections, the allocable cost principle sometimes is not fulfilled. So what we do is, the finance person will budget certain costs which is not even there in the program proposal, but because traditionally we have been including it, या फिर वो कोई कॉस्ट ऐसी नहीं बजट नहीं करेगा जो हमने प्रोग्राम प्रपोजल में दे रखा है, एंड देन लेटर ऑन वी हैव टू गो इन फॉर पोस्ट अवार्ड अमेंडमेंट, because we have not kept the proposal and budget together. The proposal person, making person, and the budget making person have not talked properly. Please remember, of a grant proposal, the program side or the program narrative or the program proposal and the budget are two sides or two parts, two wheels of the project of the grant proposal. If both wheels have to go together, only then the grant will be executed properly. Just as program and finance, as two wheels of the cart of an organization, have to go together to so that the organization can run. So also the grant proposal can run smoothly if the program proposal and budget talk to each other and are in synchronous or in symmetry or in talking terms. So who makes the program proposal in the organization? The fundraising person, the program persons. Who makes the budget person or the finance person. Both of them have to talk together. Only then the principle of allocability will be correctly represented both in the program proposal as well as in the budget. Otherwise problem आती है. एक्टिविटी की प्रॉब्लम आ सकती है, यूनिट्स की प्रॉब्लम आ सकती है, कवरेज की प्रॉब्लम आ सकती है, एलोकेबल नहीं हो रहा. देन यू फाइंड, मैंने तो प्रपोजल के अंदर लिखा था इतने विलेजेस कवर होंगे, आपने तो बजट के अंदर जब बजट किया तो इतना ही बजट किया, तो इतने विलेजेस कैप्चर ही नहीं हो सकते या कवर ही नहीं हो सकते. So it's not allocable. It's allocable but not fully allocable. That's what it is. And the second is a situation where it just cannot be allocated because the program proposal does not have that activity. So activity ना होना या activity inadequately cover होना, both are questions of allocability. The third is reasonable cost. Reasonable is very subjective. For a bigger organization, even a bigger cost is reasonable. For a smaller organization, even a slightly a higher cost is unreasonable. So you will have to see based on your historical cost, what is reasonable and what is not reasonable. Otherwise, budget की review होने के time में you will not be able to. Now, what is reasonable should be based on your policies. HR को कितना हम देंगे, minimum wages देंगे, EPF देंगे, gratuity देंगे, और ये हमारा compensation है. Not that 8,000 देंगे ना 10,000 देंगे. So if you are able to have policies and you have those compensations, you have your historical cost, you have ways of showing that this is reasonable, that is how you should budget. That cost should be taken. Consistent means that year after year in the budget, increases in the cost should be, factored in. सो अगर कॉस्ट ऑफ इंडेक्स, लिविंग इंडेक्स या इन्फ्लेशन जिसको हम बोलते हैं, वो अगर 5% है या 10% हमको लेना है, तो कंसिस्टेंटली हमको अगर 4 साल का बजट, 3 साल का बजट बनाना है, तो हर साल हमको 10% लेना होगा. किन्हीं किन्हीं एक्टिविटीज के हम अंदर इन्फ्लेशन का इम्पैक्ट नहीं होगा, किन्हीं एक्टिविटीज में 15% होगा, किन्हीं एक्टिविटीज में 10% हो सकता है. सो वी हैव टू बी कंसिस्टेंट इन टर्म्स ऑफ द कॉस्ट ईयर ऑन ईयर. That is what is consistency. Unallowable is the opposite of allowable cost. So if you have some costs which are not allowed, they will not be they cannot be paid out of the grant proposal. You will have to see where it can be paid. Now, unallowable or disallowable में फर्क है. This is unallowable, which means this is not permitted by the donor. Disallowed cost का मतलब होता है that the cost was not rightly incurred and therefore has been, while it was part of the costing, it was not utilized properly and has been disallowed by the donor. तो वो ये कॉस्ट आपने हमसे चार्ज करा है, ये कॉस्ट तो इस काम के लिए यूज ही नहीं होना चाहिए था. ऑल्दो इट इज नॉट अनअलाउबल, but it should not have been used for this particular activity while you have used it for that activity. This is disallowed, which means that this will not be permitted by the donor. ये cost के principles ध्यान रखिए. So we straight away go to the basics of a budget. Now, what I mean to say, the basic of the budget, you all know the basic of a budget. Why? Because the budget actually gives an estimation. It gives you an idea of the income. What is the fund going to come? So we have seen funds. Okay, we have seen funds, and we'll know which category of funds this income is actually. So the fund is a liability till the time that it has not been spent and becomes an income, except for corpus, which we had seen, where the grant becomes an income once it is utilized. Okay, until then it's actually an obligation, or it's what I call as trust money. Okay, so basically a budget is an estimation of income, and on the other side the expenditure. We had seen the cost. So basically when you put down the income and expenditure on a spreadsheet, okay, for a specified period of time, okay, that's the project period for which you have made that budget. That exactly is the budget sheet or the budget for your particular project or your organization. So it's not just the project, the total sum total of all the projects and other costs which are not funded by the various projects will all add up to your organization budget. So whichever way you look at, a budget is basically an estimation. Okay, one thing is very, very clear. This is an estimation, because the the estimations will get converted into actuals once the budget is operated. Okay, when you actually start implementing programs, a particular project. Basically, it's called the financial plan. So you have the program plan, and you have the as your program blueprint, and you have the budget as your financial plan or the blueprint for how money will come and how money will go. Okay, one needs to budget the plan. Sometimes we get into the problem of planning the budget. It's never to be done like this, that you plan the budget. Ab kya budget karna hai is not what is important. What is important is that your plan should drive the budget numbers that you put on the budget sheet. Okay. Otherwise, there'll be a problem of allowability. Okay. There'll be a problem of allocability. You remember those words? That is what I'm trying to explain here. The budget is a plan, is a financial plan for your program plan, and it must mirror. So the financial plan and the program plan should be mirror images of your project. One representing programmatic deliverables, the other representing financial deliverables. Okay, and they cannot be separated from each other is what I'm saying. All right. Now, uh, you know, budget. So when we talk about what does the budget do, okay, what the budget does is basically it's a planning tool. It says what are the what needs to be done to achieve the objective of that particular project or organization. So that's the planning part of it. How this budget will ensure that we plan in such a fashion that the objectives for that project are met. Second is it's a control tool. Okay. Uh, it tells us what is the total cost within our kind of cost structures, within our kind of policies. For instance, you have the HR policy. What is the HR policy saying for a particular cost? So it helps control the, as a control tool in terms of saying this is the framework within which the budget has been prepared and also explained and approved by the donor. The third one is it's a compliance tool. Okay. Compliance means that this is the end ceiling on for this particular project in terms of the budget. Okay, so you cannot cross the that ceiling. It's also a compliance tool in the sense that it says that, well, whatever are the compliance laws in this country are also being taken care of when we are actually doing the budget. You cannot do anything which is beyond the statutory and regulatory provisions of law. So you pay or you don't pay is not your decision. The decision is whether in law this is payable or not payable. So that way it helps you to decide on the on compliance with laws, as well as it is a compliance tool in terms of telling you this is the total ceiling or total amount beyond which you cannot actually go. Okay, so this shows that the budget is not just an Excel sheet. It budget is also doing the function of planning. It also does the function of uh, 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 compliance, and it also does the function of controlling. Within control means that within a framework this budget has been prepared, which will be acceptable to everybody, to you and to the donor, because you have made certain policies and procedures for your organization. This budget fits into that, and that policy and procedure is also telling the outside world that we are adhering to these policies and procedures. So it's a much bigger tool in terms of a budget, just not the budget as it is. And we'll see the types of budgets, and we'll see the budget justification note and things like that quickly, in order to understand that the budget should not be taken as a piece of Excel sheet. Okay, the budget covers qualitative, quantitative, and cost aspects. Three things. One is what is the number, what is the cost for that number, and the qualitative aspect means how those numbers have been arrived at, or what are the reason, what is the rationale behind a number. So you will say, well, I have travel which is these many units, that's the quantitative unit. Now, are those units in terms of round trip, means to and fro? That is what the qualitative explanation is, and for whom it is to be done is again the qualitative aspect. And the cost is how much travel cost will be involved. Now, where will that travel cost come from? Not from anywhere, but from your policy, from your travel policy. Therefore, the budget is doing the control function, or it is a control tool, because it's saying that the cost and the numbers, the quantitative numbers will also be based on your program budget, okay, or your program proposal, because it will say these many trips to be done for delivering these services. Now, there has to be a relationship between all these aspects in terms of the deciding on what quality or what is the kind of activity, what is the number of units that are required, and what is the cost aspect relating to that particular activity. So all those things have to be actually looked at, and this covers all these three aspects. Now, what is the purpose of a budget? So as we had seen in the first point, it's basically an estimation. One has to very clearly, and that is why when we are talking about our initial session, we are saying these estimates might need to be tweaked or altered or changed, because these are estimates. These are best case estimates based on our understanding at the time when the proposal was made. So the actuals will be made definitely, they will never be equal to the estimation. The actuals will be varying, and therefore we might have to go back to the donor for maybe course correction, as I call it, for purposes as we will see that. So basically it's an estimation. You cannot say that this much money has to be spent. It might vary, and therefore there are tolerances that are there that are allowed by the donor. It helps recognition. The budget enables recognition. What I mean by recognition is it says what is the activity, to which group does that. So if the activity is holding a workshop, then is it part of the training or capacity building group? If the activity is payment of salary, is it part of HR cost? That's what is the activity in the group. That is how you have to understand. So activity is at the lower level, more granular, more at the base level, and combining or collapsing all those activities which pertain to a particular category is what is the group. And that is how also we are making the budgets. That is what it shows the income, it shows the expenditure. If there is a shortfall, then that's a deficit. If there's income more than expenditure, it is a surplus. We know that in not for profits, we attempt to balance the budget, meaning that we ensure that the income is equal to expenditure. Now, sometimes deficit and surplus may arise because of the fact that this budget was an estimation, and the actual numbers might mean that the difference between this estimation and actuals may lead to deficit and surplus. But that is deficit surplus more for the for profit. But for the not for profit, what we attempt to do is not a surplus or a deficit, but it's a balanced budget, because we are a charitable institution. We are an institution where we are saying our expenditure should be for this project should be met out from the income and should be completely met out, because we are not transferring any surplus or making any surplus. That is why we are called charitable institution. Next is cost reasonableness. Now, income will follow the cost. So the budget first looks at what is the costing or the expenditure, and what donors look at is the purpose is to say that the costs are reasonable. Now, the costs are reasonable based on, of course, your policy framework. If you don't have policy framework, it becomes very difficult. Second is in terms of the laws that are there. So if there are HR costs that you have, are you complying with the laws? Are those costs reasonable for being approved? Now, the reasonableness will differ from organization to organization. Again, as we had seen the cost principles in the last session. All right. So it helps to understand whether costs are reasonable. It helps to segregate costs. Okay. We had seen these types of costs: direct costs, common cost, indirect or overhead cost. Now, when you make the budget, these costs will be represented or segregated like that. So remember, I have said one is activity and one is group or category. One is the type of cost. Is it a direct cost? Is it an indirect cost? Is it a common cost? We have seen that. I'm not going to repeat it. And we had also seen the why and what of a cost. So you have to remember all these things. Very easy, nothing very difficult. But we have to understand and apply our thought process in terms of identifying or segregating them, so that we know what is the direct cost, who owns the direct cost, who owns the common cost, who owns the indirect cost. The management or the finance folks will hold the indirect cost, but they will also tell you in case there is indirect cost, which we had seen, meaning that this is your management cost or an additional cost to cover your organization, not the project. Now, if there is a deficit in the budget, then probably it can be met from the indirect cost if the donor is not prepared to give you more money. So that segregation will also help us in understanding adjustments that may need to be made based on actual implementation versus the estimation. Then there's a question of it also explains cost matching, which means are other donors also providing or co-financing that project. So there can be two donors who might be funding that. So that cost matching is also represented in terms of the respective share of each donor to the total budget. There can be kind support also, okay, which can also be there, or there will be cost matching for multi-donor grants. Multi-donor means more than one donor is giving that grant. So cost matching is also the purpose of making the budget to see that the entire cost is being met and who gives that cost. Next is course correction. I had said estimation and I had said actuals. Now, what is course correction? Means as you are progressing, is there a need for correction or is there a need for check some kind of a change? That is what is called course correction. Budget ke andar change does not happen at the end of the project period, and that is why I say this is a tool of monitoring, budget monitoring, which is course correction, okay, based on measurements of actual versus the estimation. So you now understand that budget is not to be seen at the beginning of a project and to be seen at the end of the project. Every regular interval, you have to see how we are doing in terms of the estimations versus the actuals. And that is what is called as the budget monitoring exercise, that the organization has to sit and decide and evaluate where they are. And do you need to go for to the donor, or within your organization, you need to do the course correction? It's a so you might have to go to the donor. That is what we had said is post contract amendment. If you remember the when we were looking at the budget grant life cycle, it's basically a framework for the donor and the donee. Basically, what it says is that for the donor, the grantor, and for you as implementer, this is a common framework. So we both of them agree that this is the kind of blueprint, or this is the sheet that we both will own, and we will see that we agree to adhere to these to this sheet, both in terms of making the payment or granting and utilizing. Okay, so that's what the purpose of a budget is. Each of these points that I have mentioned have decisions to be taken. If you talking of course correction, that means that you need to have a regular monitoring mechanism. Monitoring. Okay, monitoring will bring about control, because the monitoring will lead to some actions that will be taken. So that is the difference between budget monitoring and that's the difference between budget and that is and budgetary control. We will see that. So one has to also understand budget control is different from budget monitoring. Budget control will depend on the outcome of budget monitoring. Now, what are the prerequisites for robust budget? The organization structure should be there. Who will prepare the budget? Who will approve the budget? That kind of structuring should be there. The data should be there. We have seen cost is based on historical cost. Now you need to have data or cost data to be able to make the budget. Chart of accounts means how you will classify, okay, the various costs that are there, because they have to be then, those are estimates and they have to be spent. Once you spend it, it will go to the account book, okay, to your records, to your accounting records. That's what I'm referring to. So there has to be a relationship between how your budget has been set up and how it will get recorded when it is actually spent. Managerial support, which is very critical, because I see a lot of small medium organizations actually not giving credence to the budget monitoring, budget control, or even the budgeting exercise. So uh, that only leads to the fact that when we were talking of uh, reapplication for a with a donor or a re-grant from a donor, we do not get it because we do not have the right kind of managerial, the organizational structure, the culture, and the support for budget. There is a formal process for formulation that has to be there, and that has to be linked to your organization structure. I come to the types of budgets for not-for-profits. Not-for-profits have two types of budget broadly, okay? Two categorization of budget. One is what is called as activity-based budgeting. Now, activity means at the base level, what is the activity that has to be done, and that activity will help us, direct us in terms of budgeting. Meaning, suppose we have to do a workshop. Now, what are the various activities that are involved in the workshop? What are the various activities that are involved in conducting a workshop? Okay, and that will decide like this. Okay, this is an illustration. So it says, if you want to do a workshop, these are the activities on the left hand side that you will do. This is the cost, this is the units, and this is the total. That's how the budget is. The qualitative, the quantitative. So you will say trainer fee. You will need a trainer. Okay, one trainer, two trainer. What will be the, so that is the qualitative aspect. Okay, the quantitative aspect is in terms of the number of units. Okay, the cost aspect is in terms of the rate per unit, and the unit multiplied by the cost will give you the total amount. Now, these are the various activities. So it is at the base level or the granular level that we are trying to, build up the budget from the base. It is grossing up. Okay, it is grossing up various activities to say that for a workshop, the various activities that have to be initiated are these, and the cost for one workshop will be, or one activity as a workshop will be 32,000. And the activity will lead to a conducting a particular workshop, and the various components of that activity have been detailed, because otherwise, how do you decide 32,000? That will be based on what are the elements in that activity that have to be accounted for, and that is what is called as the activity based budgeting. Okay, uh, कितना resources required है and कितना costing आएगा, because without this you will not be able to do anything in terms of coming to that estimated figure of 32,000. Now this is also driven by your program proposal. How, when you are working on the capacity building part of your proposal, you will say we will hold two workshops. Okay, and the two workshops will be for 3 days. Now you're seeing the number of units, 3 days. Okay, and therefore you will have venue cost for 3 days, you will have rentals for furniture, you will have to and fro cost, you will have food and incidental, you will have all those costs for a period of 3 days. Now where is this sheet getting constructed? This sheet is getting constructed from your program proposal. All right, this is not coming out of something, suddenly you say 3 days multiply kar dete. Now it's actually coming out uh, from your program proposal, which says a training will be conducted for a period of 3 days, and this training will be this, for which the resource person, you'll have to identify who's the competent resource, the venue. Basically, these costs of rupees 500 per day for venue is based on your historical cost. These are all theoretical, so nobody can get it for 500. What I'm saying is that this cost is also has to be reasonable. How will it be reasonable? For that location, what is the cost like? You will have to do the scouting, you have to do procurement. We will see next in the next session about procurement. What I'm saying is that they are all related. They cannot be looked at independently. And unless you understand the relatedness between all these activities as programmers, you will not be able to deliver better. This is what is called as activity-based budgeting. Now we come to the line item budgeting. Okay. Sometimes the activity-based is also called subline budget. Subline, line ke niche, subline budget. Okay. What is the line item budget? Donors come and say, well, how many line items do you have, and what is the line item budget? Now the line item budget is all the activities in a particular area, like all the workshops within the overall budget line of training, when they are included or subsumed or collapsed, that particular category becomes the line item. Okay, like HR cost. HR cost is a line item. What are the various activities or elements of that HR cost? You have salary, you have HRA, you have gratuity, you have earned leave. All those are various parts of the activities in that particular the line item. So the line item budget is a budget where all activities have been collapsed into some categories. So some of the budget, some of the donors are looking at line item budgets, but you cannot make the line item budget without doing the activity based budgeting. The activity based budgeting will lead to what is the budget for a line item. But now, why do donors look at line items? Because they have some understanding of how much money should be paid for this particular line. Now, in a budget which is for implementation, they will say the theoretically, I mean, just normally, as I understand, they will say not more than 30 to 33% of the cost should be on HR. So for them, the budget becomes a control tool in terms of understanding whether the planning has been done properly by this organization for this budget also or not. Okay. So the broad heads categories are what is called as line item. Okay. So the line item is a much better indicator or tracker of how how the budget is being done. ये है line item budget. Now here what you're seeing is human resources is a line, travel is a line, equipment supplies is a line. But within equipment and supply, you have, you know, kind of supplies is what is mentioned. You have materials and handouts in travel airfare. You have participants transportation. Similarly in HR, what are the various components in HR? So now the trainer, the CEO's cost, all those are various activities in this broader line item. The broader line items will be only 5, 6 in a budget. So generally, what will be the line items? It will be HR, travel, equipment, it will be training cost, other office cost or other costs. Then you might have, you know, the overhead cost, which we call as indirect cost. For instance, in this budget, 10% of the total cost has been given as an overhead or an indirect cost or a management cost. Here in these lines, you will also represent the shared cost. So you will have direct cost and indirect and common cost both reflected in these line items respectively, wherever it is. So you remember we had talked about direct cost and indirect cost and common cost, shared cost, and the direct cost is 100% attributed. The common cost is what is the share of shared cost or cost that benefit all the projects to this particular project. They'll all have to be brought here. Okay. Now, when you do this particular budget, from here you can also derive the budget which says this is the program service delivery cost and this is the support cost. That is the functional cost. So from this budget sheet, you can derive you have the natural heads here, but you can also derive what will it cost for program delivery. So you have ₹100 budget, and from that budget, you can say out of this ₹100, 80 rupees is for program delivery. These items are program delivery directly, the function that they are performing, that is they are delivering services to the beneficiary. And 20 rupees is basically supporting the program service delivery. All right. So you can see the functional and natural head together in a budget sheet, and you can derive it. Why people look at program functional heads of expenditure? Why donors look at that? Because they want to see maximum amount going to program delivery. Okay, that is the functional aspect of this grant, because we are not here for the natural head. We are not here for salary distribution. We are here for service delivery. So please understand that these are the two broad categories of how budgets are formulated. Very important. And unless you understand, and I'm talking nothing which is not meant for you. When we look at a budget, we have to look at the activities, and sometimes you might get only the line item budget. So you'll have to ask for the activity budget to be able to see what quantitative, qualitative, and cost. Line item, you will not be able to see it because that is a rolled up budget. That budget has been collapsed into a particular way for purposes of tracking. But for implementation, the detailed budget, which is the activity based budget, is something that needs to be with you, because you have to decide ये training, ये beneficiary को इतना program supplies, ये कितना supplies, कितने birds देने हैं, या कितने goats देने हैं, या कितना हमारे को compost के लिए net चाहिए रहेगा. All that will be the activity based budget. Okay. And that activity based budget will, when it gets collapsed or rolled up, as we are calling it, roll up मतलब किसी चीज को ऊपर, जैसे आप पर्दे को ऊपर करते हो तो roll up हो जाता है ना वो, and light starts coming. That is what is called as rolled up. But the rolled up is more a management necessity for the budget, because they don't want to see at the activity level. What helps them is the management. The management is at the line item level, because they not need to see the summary figures actually. Now, there are other types of budgets also, which I have mentioned here. One thing that you need to understand is what is called a fixed budget and what is called a variable budget. Now, here, the other budgets I'll just do in one shot, but fixed budget means that there is no variation in the line item. There is no variation in the activity. Whatever we have given you, within that only you have to do. It becomes very difficult. So normally you don't have fixed budgets. You have variable budgets. Variable budgets means that the estimation and the actuals can vary, and we are recognizing that Therefore, the variation is allowed, and this is called a variable budget. So most of our budgets are variable budgets, but the variation is capped. Capped means there is a ceiling, and we had seen compliance. Budget is a compliance tool. That is a ceiling. Now, the ceiling, within the ceiling, there is a variation that is permitted. There is a change that can be permitted, whether it is plus or whether it is minus. Okay. So the tolerance is what I'm referring to. With the ceiling being there, there is a tolerance. So 100 rupees is your ceiling for that activity. But the donor will say, we understand that this is an estimation and the actuals will vary. So हो सकता है cost बढ़ गया, हो सकता है, the venue cost has gone up, हो सकता है to and fro cost might have gone up for some reason, whatever. So they will say, well, you have a variability or a tolerance, that is what is called, in the ceiling of say 5%. So you have 100 rupees, you can do that activity in 95 rupees also, or you can do the activity in 105. But beyond that, beyond 105, please come back to us for approval. Now, what that 95 does, if you are efficient. So we had seen the first session, efficient use of resources. We did it in 95. What does it do? It gives you 5 rupees for some activity where you might actually overspend, or you might need to increase the number of units. Now, what will it do? It will bring about effectiveness or better output for that efficiency. So efficiency is input, output. It is process driven. Effectiveness is delivery or output driven. So please remember the variable budget. I'm again and again trying to help you to understand and to relate. The variable budget has variance permitted, but again within a certain tolerance. Then there are other kinds of budgets which I have already mentioned here. Incremental budget, we had seen consistency, the word consistency in cost. Incremental budget means that for each subsequent period of the budget, we will provide you with some increase or increment. That can be 5%, 10%, but you'll have to justify. Okay. So every year, and you have to be consistent with that increment. That is what is incremental budget. It is, so generally we are permitted incremental budget. Means if there is a 3-year budget, you can't say that year 1 में जो cost लगा था वो year 3 में वही cost लगेगा, because the value of money keeps coming down. So you will need more money to deliver the same quantity or same service. That is what is called the value of money. The value of money goes down, therefore you will need an increment to support or to provide the buffer to be able to deliver. Otherwise, next time you are in year 1, you are saying 10 units. In year 3, you will be able to do only 7 units with that fixed cost or that cost without increment. That is why inflation is accounted for in incremental based budgeting. That is normally all allowed by donors. That's one thing that you have to understand. Now, the value based budget, proposition budgeting is something which says we will drive, we will direct all costs where we have to deliver. So we will not do any activity which is for the sake of doing or supporting. We will not do that. We will target all our resources or costs to deliver the best service to the for service delivery in terms of what needs to be delivered. That's what is called value proposition budget or priority based budget. Our priority, now the proposal says this is what needs to be done. So our priority in terms of activities to be, for which to cost and for which money is to be raised, is only related to the to that particular service delivery, is what is called as. Now, if you do value proposition budgeting, what you are doing is you are ensuring that you are doing or costing for activity which are directly related to delivery. And that is how it should be. Zero-based budgeting is basically meant for government, where you do not have for the prior years any particular data, nor do you look at that data. So ZBB is basically meant for government, where they do the budget from scratch every year. Now, there is this concept of performance-based budgeting, which is also coming. Performance-based budgeting means we will give you budget based on delivery. So what happens is they will say, whatever is the outcome, we are talking more in terms of the outcome. So this outcome has to be achieved. We will give you the budget based on your achieving the outcome, not the process, but the outcome. If you do not achieve the outcome, the lesser budget will be given. There can also be an incentive. So this particular kind of budgeting is now gaining impact, gaining increased attention by donors, where they say, let's talk of outcome or output based budgeting rather than process based budgeting. That's what is called as PBB or outcome. Now, there are something called development impact bonds. I don't know whether you have heard about that, where impact is driving the cost, or what the money you will get is driven not by the process, not by doing an activity, but by proving that that activity resulted in output or impact. So these are some other areas. But the budget justification note is something that I just want to mention here. Basically, we do not see a budget justification note. What a budget justification note is like this, that the Excel sheet that you have prepared. Now, always when you are saying these three numbers or these particular cost, what is the explanation? Where from have we taken the cost? Why are we saying we need 3 units, three number of days for this training, is what is explained in the budget justification note. Why? Because budget अगर justification budget आपने 3 साल का बनाया है, year 3 के अंदर if there is another person who is taken over, then that budget sheet will not be able to help him to understand what these numbers are, both in terms of quality and in terms of quantity and in terms of costing. So this budget justification note, which is prepared at the beginning of the budget, okay, or when you are making the program budget, helps to explain in greater detail why this activity is being done, which program component will it affect, and why, and the way it has to be delivered. So this is what is called as the good donors normally ask for a budget narrative. It is called budget narrative. It's also called as the budget justification document. Even if you do not have a budget justification note requirement by the donor, good organizations should prepare a Word document which should be attached to the budget Excel sheet, where the need for that cost, what that cost will deliver, and how this amount of costing has been derived, and how that incremental budgeting has been done, is all explained. It provides the justification for calculation for the need for that activity. Which particular component in the program proposal is this activity going to affect? Why has it been derived from there? This budget note ties up the budget sheet and the program proposal. Very important document, which is something that is not normally done. But bigger organizations like European Union and other international organizations do insist on a budget justification note. In fact, for them, the budget sheet is the budget justification note. Now, coming to balance, surplus, and deficit, I'm leaving this. Now, coming to budget monitoring. So, I had said we have a budget, and now we have started implementing. Budget is an estimation, implementation is actual. Now, what needs to be done is some mechanism has to be there to see that the estimation and actual is monitored. That's called budget monitoring. So, whatever is the actual expenditure, whatever is the budget, where is the actual expenditure coming from? The actual expenditure is coming from your account books. All the expenditure will go to the accounts people, the finance people, and you will send it. Okay, all of that will be compiled in Tally or wherever software, and then they will generate what is called as a variance report. Now, the variance report can be generated from Tally itself, so you don't need somebody to actually do the report separately. Now, what I'm saying is, please remember that there has to be a variance mechanism that should be there for every project, every month, 3 months, whatever is the periodicity you decide. Because the variance report will show where the variance is and how much variance has already occurred. In normal budgets are variable budgets, but you must know what is the variable amount that is there in terms of the variance. Otherwise, if you have crossed a certain variance amount, which is permitted by the budget, then you have to go to the donor. We did see that. Okay, why we need the budget variances? To also see where we are not spending, where we are spending more, to also see if we are spending more than what the budget is, or we are spending in a budget for a year, in 2 months we have spent the budget, then what will we do for the last 8 months? Or was the budget meant to be spent in the first 2 months as per the program proposal? All that help is provided in the budget variance. Okay. uh, uh, so the uh, Tally software can generate the budget variance report, and both the program and finance folks have to sit together along with top management to examine the budget variance report. Now, what does the budget variance report help us to do? It leads to what is called as budgetary control. So the monitoring will lead to an action, or every action is basically a tool of control. So it says that the budget monitoring has resulted in giving us some indication of what action needs to be done based on the monitoring, and that action is the budgetary control. Okay, so you will come up with deviations or tolerances. That tolerance we had seen in variable budget, we have crossed that tolerance, okay, or the deviation. Now we have to take some action on that. That is what is basically the the role of budgetary control. So there is a difference between monitoring and control. Monitoring is scrutiny, assessment, checking of where we are. Based on the checking, what action needs to be done is control, the budgetary control part. So the budgetary control will say budget realignment karna hai, budget ka no cost extension karna hai. We've seen that, all that. This is what is called as course correction. This is what is called as course correction. During the term or tenure of the project, are you exercising budgetary control so that by the end of the project period, the budget utilization more or less mirrors the estimation? Or if the estimation was not correct, then that correction has been made and your actuals are in line with the corrected budget. That is what is called as budgetary control. Very important. Budget monitoring will throw up action to be taken by you within the organization or with the donor. That is the difference between budgetary control and budget monitoring and budgetary control. Now coming to interest, just for the sake of 1 minute, interest that we earn, and sometimes our program folks say, well, we are earning interest on the income that we got. So when we get the grant, that's our income. Once it's spent, that it will be shown as an income on the income side of our budget. Okay, generally the budget does not have the income side, because the budget amount that is there is treated as the budget request, and that is the income. Now when you get the money, you might earn some interest, and that interest the donor will say whether it will become part of the grant budget. That is, we will give that much less money. That is what is called as deductive. Okay, so the interest will be deducted for the grant from the grant, from that amount will be deducted from the total grant. We will give, so if 100 rupees was there as the grant and 2 rupees you earn as interest, we will only give you 98. 2 rupees you will get from the interest and spend it. So that is how 100 will come. Some of the donors will say, no, we will give you full 100. The 2 rupees you can spend on additional activities, or you might even keep it for your own other activities. So that is what is called additive. So that is how interest has to be done. And the finance folks will tell you how interest is actually being generated. Similarly, for HR cost, the budgeting has to be very clearly done in terms of what is the direct cost, what is the shared cost, and if there are indirect cost funding, the indirect cost or management cost funding HR, there has to be a mechanism for recording all that, because then you have to tell the donor how it has been done. That's how HR allocation has to be done. Now I come to the robust grant monitoring system. So we have seen grant, we have seen costs, we have seen budgets. Budget के अंदर हमने budget monitoring देखा था. Grant monitoring means you are monitoring the grant both on the program side as well as on the finance side. Okay, so your grant monitoring can also include budget monitoring and program monitoring together. So, but I've shown it separately. I've shown budget monitoring separately. But when we come to evaluation of the grant, then both program people have to also prepare something like the variance report that we had seen. वो variance report कहाँ से आएगा? जो आपने log frame दिया है, जो आपने outputs और activities assess किया है, जो आपने Gantt chart बनाया है, उस Gantt chart के against में programmatically where we are, and our variance report will be the one which will be the budget monitoring output report, which will help the overall grant monitoring system. The grant monitoring system is very important because it helps to take decision both on the program side and on the finance side within the organization and with the donor. Okay, uh, that is what is so the uh, timely action both for the program and for the budget is the output of the budget monitoring system. You have to have grant monitoring system. The grant monitoring system will ensure that grant monitoring system also shows that you have not done some activities, but you have spent so much of the budget which was not supposed to be spent that much. So that those that scrutiny or monitoring will also throw up those kind of variances which we might have to look at, because now today the program folks and the finance folks both are working. It might be that the program people have not understood the particular activity and are kind of spending more time and effort on that and more resources on that which may not be required. So that course correction can be within the organization based on the outcome of grant monitoring as well as with the donor. So that's the difference between grant monitoring and budget monitoring. Now, we come quickly. I will want to tell you some things which are very important, because when we see grant contracts, I go to organizations, we find that the grant contract is never even shared with the program folks. So whenever there is a new grant, please insist that you get a copy of the duly signed or duly executed grant contract. Very important. Now, I've divided the grant contract terms and conditions into general conditions and operational conditions. Now, general conditions means that every grant contract should have these broadly these conditions. Uh, so when you have an MOU or when you have a grant contract, what is the difference? Sometimes we don't even understand that. Even our managements might not. MOU is a memorandum of understanding, which generally is a understanding. It does not have financial implications. But if it has financial implications, it should be either in the form of a grant agreement or a grant contract or an agreement. Okay, that's the big distinction that one has to understand. So sometimes we have grant contracts which are MOUs. MOUs do not have financial implication. MOU is a understanding, but when that understanding has financial implication, that becomes in the nature of grant contract. And we have to be mindful of the word use of the word MOU or grant contract accordingly. Sometimes you might have a no non-financial understanding. That will be an MOU. Okay. Now, what are the general conditions of a grant contract? One is recitals, which means the two of us are coming together. The two of us are, we are two people, two different entities, and we are coming together for a particular program. Okay. Because we need each other. That is the preamble or what is called as recitals. अब आप पढ़ोगे recitals word, आपको बोलोगे ये recital मतलब क्या होता है? Recital is setting the context. Okay. Then you have definitions of various terms that have been used in the grant contract, and these have to be understood. The grant amount and the purpose. Recital says that we want to come together because we are into these two areas. We are a donor and we want to fund water. And we are an implementing agency. We work on water and environment. That is how we have come together. But what is the purpose for which? We want to implement a watershed project. That's the grant amount and the purpose. Okay. No pledge. You cannot give this money to anybody against collateral. Okay. कॉम्प्लीमेंट्री फंडिंग, वी हैड सीन कॉस्ट मैचिंग. अगर इस पर्टिकुलर प्रोजेक्ट के अंदर दो फंडर्स हैं तो व्हाट इज द कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऑफ कॉम्प्लीमेंट्री फंडिंग? सो बोथ ऑफ देम विल हैव टू बी सेट आउट. What is the designated contact for this particular contract? Who are the points of contact, and the point of contact for grant and for program can be different. Conflict of interest and ethical conduct. So there is a declaration that both the parties, that is the grantor and the grantee in a grant contract, there is no conflict of interest. That is, there is nothing in common between the two of them, and they will adhere to the concepts of ethical conduct in handling this particular contract. Confidentiality means we will keep all information to both of us. Term and termination basically means, term means the period, and termination means what are the conditions on which this contract can be terminated. It can be for convenience. It can be as a penalty. The notice of changes. So every change that will be made will be through a written notice, not without, not verbal. compliance with laws. I've already told you. So just like the budget has to comply with the law, the grant contract says, as a grantee, you will have to comply with all the laws that are applicable to this particular grant implementation. Indemnity means that you will, if there is any action against you, that action should have nothing to do with us, both ways. That's called indemnity. Okay. Publication and licenses means that whatever is the output from this particular project, what will be our terms and conditions on publications, on intellectual property right, any licenses that have to be done. Visibility and publicity means how will we talk about this particular program outputs and outcomes in the general public. Force majeure means that if there is anything which is there because of the act of God, an earthquake, a COVID, then the contract can be temporarily suspended and will not mean penalty for the grantee, because that action is not because of the grantee, but it is because of the force of God, or a force or an act of God, or an act which is beyond the control of the grantee. That's what is called as force majeure. Relationship of parties means they are independent parties. Indemnity, each of them indemnifies against any loss to the other. That is what it is. Relationship is means these are principal parties. There is no principal employer employee or any kind of a contractor contractee relationship. Both of them are independent. And please remember, they have to be set as grantor and grantee. Only then this contract is a charitable contract. Otherwise, the nature of the contract may change. Governing laws. What will the laws be for governing this contract? Waiver means if both of us have to uh, agree to letting go of some terms and conditions, that is what is called as waiver. So we agree to waive certain conditions during the currency of the project. Notices all have to be, written notices. So that is what it is. Moving on to other parts, which is severability, means if there is any clause that has been, which is not enforceable, does not mean that the contract will not be enforceable, which means that, one particular clause that is not enforceable does not make the contract non-enforceable. Assignment or delegation means, can I give this to any other person to implement instead of me? That has to be also slated. So if we've seen the word subgrantee, if there's a subgrant that is to which there is an assignment made, that should be part of it. Otherwise, if the contract says, general condition says no assignment, then it means that this contract has to be implemented only by you. Acknowledgement means, you acknowledge the contribution of each of us at appropriate forum. Counterparts means that this contract is in two parts, because both parties will keep one part. So that is what is counterparts. Entire agreement means nothing beyond this is the contract terms and conditions. Arbitration, if there is a dispute. Jurisdiction, under which particular area will the courts hold jurisdiction, or courts will hear the any kind of dispute. So arbitration is one, but once arbitration fails, for instance, then it goes to a court of law. Which are the courts? So the courts, generally the grantors will keep the courts in the state, or in the city, or in the state where they are located. So if the donor is in Delhi, they will say the courts in Delhi will have, even though the grantees may be anywhere in the country. So the courts in Delhi will hold jurisdiction. That is what is the meaning of jurisdiction. Now, the remedies means that each of the parties have an authority or right to get some kind of relief from the court in case there is something wrong that is done by the other party. So these are certain standard legal and general conditions. Coming to the operational conditions, what is the scope of work? This is a watershed project. तो हम इसमें कितने watersheds बनाएंगे, किस area में बनाएंगे, कितने period में बनाएंगे, what will be the size of the watersheds, what will be the benefits that will come, what will be the deliverables that are there based on the scope of work, what is the budget, what are the eligible costs. Again, the word eligible means which are allowable costs, which are reasonable, which are consistent. Grant disbursement, how will the grant be disbursed? When all payments will be made? What are the conditions for payments? Is it only on reimbursement, or will there be an advance, mobilization advance? All that. Log frame and work plan will be part of the operational conditions. What is the work plan, the Gantt chart? The log frame means in terms of what is the outcome, what are the outputs, what are the activities, what are the assumptions for those activities, all that. I think you all know that. The LFA approach. The basis of accounting, separate books of accounts, separate bank account. All these are financial things. Bills and vouchers, cash expenses. These are all financial parts. Okay. Treatment of interest. We had seen additive or deductive. What are the procurement? If you're doing procurement of goods and services, what are the rules that will be followed? Is it that those rules will be basically the rules of the grantor, or will it be your rules? If they say you will follow your procurement policies, then first see whether you have a procurement policy also or not. And how will you procure those based on the rules? Because it is possible that if you don't follow the procurement policy of your organization and you procure, the donor may disallow, because that is not consistent with the procurement rules clause of the grant agreement. What will be the reporting like? Timelines be? Okay. What are the templates for reporting the periodic reports and the final reports? Sometimes there are templates that the donor will give. If you are purchasing certain items and you are paying GST, then is there an input that can be claimed as an input or not? Is what is also as a terms and conditions. Monitor some for not for profits, because you are not registered under GST. Therefore, the entire tax and the cost are a cost that you will charge to the donor. Monitoring and evaluation. So basically, this is all audit related. If there is anything wrong that you do, can the donor do recovery? What about the treatment of fixed assets? Has the donor in the grant contract allowed you to keep this, or has said that this asset has to be given to the community, or this asset has to be returned after the contract period? Please remember that. Income generation, if there are activities which result in some resources getting generated, how will they be treated? What will be the sustainability of this particular thing? So this sustainability means that can the grant contract say, well, you will look for more donors, or you will look for ensuring that there are some activities that will ensure that the income generation will continue after the end of the project. Closure of the grant. We had seen in the life cycle the word close out, and this is very important condition in the grant agreement. Sometimes you don't even look at it. Closure of the grant will say at the time of completion of the grant, what all needs to be done. What are the program things? What are the audited UCs for the entire program? How will the assets be dealt with? If there's any surplus, how that will be dealt with? All that is done. And well, is there a need for a no objection certificate from the donor? Record and retention. We will see that more. What it means is for how long will we keep this particular record of this particular project is what has to be seen. So with that, I complete this particular session. But at this stage, if there are any questions, because we are near time, Sujata says this has to be understood by corporates too when they insist on deducting TDS. I think we are doing that. We are also at Sati Development trying to do courses for CSR corporates on understanding the nuances of and the framework of not for profits. लेकिन मेरा आपको समझाना यहाँ पे इसलिए इम्पोर्टेंट है कि ये TDS और GST का इम्प्लीकेशन CSR कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स के अंदर आपका चैरिटेबल स्टेटस के लिए खतरा है. So you have to ensure that somehow or the other, whatever may be their softwares and systems where they might set up purchase orders or invoices, that's all right. But your basic document should be in the nature of a grant contract. And there should be no component of TDS, because then it gets into services and there's a consideration, give and take. GST also comes into play, which is again taxable. You get into from charitable to commercial. So that's what I want to say. I cannot explain it more because that's not what the intention is here. For applying to a grant, we may have to report the specific group of beneficiaries. Uh, uh, so if the specific group of beneficiaries are targetedly specified, then it's not a grant. Then it becomes a service contract. Please remember this. So there can be situations where in a particular contract, the donor might say, well, in the public, not in private not possible, but in public, the beneficiaries are also identified beneficiaries for which the benefits have to be given, and those beneficiaries are identified, then it moves from a grant to a service contract, because then it is identified beneficiaries, and you get into from charitable to commercial contract. So please try to ensure that generally our contracts are for beneficiaries as a homogeneous group rather than as identified beneficiaries. What is the difference between मैंने बता तो दिया था, corpus and endowment grant, both are corpus, but one is unrestricted, one is restricted, because there is a restriction on use of the income from the endowment. Difference between Section 8 company and NGOs. Section 8 company is also an NGO. There is no definition of NGO, just like grant. But NGOs are broadly categorized so we don't talk about NGOs, we talk of charitable institutions. In this country, charitable institutions are called NGOs, and the charitable institutions can be constituted in three ways: society, trust, or Section 8. They are all called NGOs loosely. They are all called charitable institutions. Income tax recognizes them as charitable institutions. Can we consider each expense in FCRA utilization account? हाँ, हाँ, you can consider cash expense. Again, there is a limit on cash expenditure of 10,000 rupees as per Section 40 3. What I want to tell you, and you've thrown a question which is very different. So in the FCRA account, if you make cash payment, restrict it to 10,000 to a person in a particular day, and that amount of expenditure should be for the direct end utilization. It should not be to a person to pay to another person as end utilization. It should be on end utilization basis. So you can pay to a vendor, but you should not pay to your employee for paying to a vendor. Could you please explain once again the reinvestment obligation on corpus funds where the purpose for using corpus is not defined? Yeah, that's right. You know what corpus is. The corpus is invested in FD. We reinvest the interest earned into corpus. So what happens is that you have got a corpus 100 rupees, and you made an FD, which is the investment. And where does your corpus? The corpus sits on the capital side, and on the asset side, it sits in the FD in your investment. Very good. Now, अब क्या हुआ? उस पे 8 rupees हमारे को interest आया. Now the donor might say, out of this 8 rupees, please don't spend the entire 8 rupees. 8 rupees के अंदर से 10% of that 8 rupees, which means 72 paisa. Oh, 10% is 80 paisa. 80 paisa out of that particular amount, you will have to reinvest in the corpus, which means your corpus will become 100.80 in the next year, at the end of the year. And that 80 paisa will again be converted into fixed deposit. So your fixed deposit will be 100.8. Your corpus on the capital side will be 100.8, and the 7.20 rupees becomes your income in the income and expenditure and can be spent. If you don't spend 7.820 rupees, then it will become your general reserve, general fund. Okay, समझ गए? Is there possible to share the क्या है recorded link today? यार ये इम्पैक्ट योग बताएगा सुमेंद्र. I think I'll get the
We will
PPT.
share the registered mail ID as we have already shared the previous one. Then we will share the second session. We will also.
All right. So those are the questions in chat. If there's a question that anybody wants to put up quickly in the next 2 minutes, 3 minutes on what's on the on unmuting, please do that. You can also raise your questions on Patik, which I had mentioned. Patik.org पे जाके आप फोरम के अंदर अपने questions direct भी कर सकते हैं. मेरे को कोई problem नहीं है. Where we can answer those questions. Why I did not do the session, the complete session, is because this session itself you need time to understand. लेकिन एक बार आपने understand कर लिया ना, तो आप फाइनेंस और प्रोग्राम का टोटल मास्टरी हो जाएगा, एंड यू विल डेफिनेटली गेट एन अपॉर्चुनिटी टू टेक अप जनरल मैनेजमेंट रोल्स इन नॉट फॉर प्रॉफिट्स. मैंने कुछ भी आपको ऐसा नहीं बताया जो आपके करंट रोल या फ्यूचर करियर के लिए यूजफुल नहीं है. बैठ के इसको सुनिएगा और ये प्रेजेंटेशन देखिएगा. हम प्रेजेंटेशन पूरी भेजेंगे. ऑल राइट Shumendru, I am closing the session. A very big thanks to all the
Thank you, sir. Thank you very
people
much.
who have joined. I can only say that मैं आपके organization का part होके आपको समझा रहा हूँ, not as a consultant. And all the remaining 6 sessions you will learn like this. So I want your attention. You have spent money to be there. We will teach you as simply as possible. Uh, considering that considering myself as a person who's a programmer, okay, not as a finance person. That's how the session will be. All the sessions as interesting as I can make. My promise to you, full value for money. We talked about VFM, value for money. I will try to give that to you. Thank you very much. See you on 21st, same time, 11 o'clock. And see you then. Thank you very much.